You're live.
Thank you, Robin. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the school committee meeting on August 10th. I do thank all the committee members and all our guests who are showing up all the time for us. So thank you so much. I know it's really hard. We look forward to getting back to a routine schedule, which would be 2 meetings a month. I guess starting in September, we have a regular schedule outlined, so we hope to make that happen, of course. We are going to change the schedule just a little bit. I hope it doesn't, that's okay with people. Casey is asked to go ahead with her presentation because she then needs to leave. So if it's okay with everyone, we'll have Casey present, and then we will do the public comment after that. And then we will go back to our deliberations. Our focus tonight or this afternoon into tonight will be around curriculum, pedagogy, remote learning, and of course, getting ready for the vote on Wednesday evening. So, Casey, are you ready to, are you gonna head off here, lead off?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, I can do that. So this is our reopening update from the last school committee meeting that Jim, Erin, Michelle, and Meg will also present from. So Erin, if you don't mind sharing your screen, and then Jim, I'll kick it off to you to get us all started.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you, Casey, and good evening, everyone. Well, as you can imagine, it certainly has been a busy week and continues to be a busy week. I can assure you that an awful lot of energy has been expended looking at how are we going to open school, and conditions see the only constant is the change. Conditions change, but we have to make a decision and make a recommendation on opening of school. And the team has been working diligently, taking all information. We've spent a lot of time listening to what the teachers had to say, listening to what parents have to say, looking at information we're getting from the panels that we've been consulting with, and doing a lot of our own reading as well. And for certain, this has been a deeply reflective process in trying to make a decision based taking in all the information and some of it's contradictory, making a decision that we believe is in the best interest of opening schools for students. Remember, this is an opening schools decision because as things move, as things change on the ground, we will make some adjustments. And what you're going to hear this evening is a process or a recommendation and a system that is really what we're calling Remote Plus. We didn't invent that, but we like the term, so we're calling it Remote Plus. And what Remote Plus really means is that students will begin the year, most students will begin the year in a remote learning environment. But the plus part of it is that we will be providing opportunities for students to meet their teachers in real time. We'll be providing opportunities for outdoor education. And we will be providing ways and in terms of moving more toward having more students in as quickly and safely as possible. And you'll hear, as Casey presents, some of the issues that are driving our decision. But there is no question that after the deep reflection that we have done, I believe this is the best way to begin the school year and moving forward from there. We'll come back and talk more specifically about any questions that you may have. But let's segue over to Casey so we can put this in context, Casey, and go through the presentation. You're going to do some of the changes in the new presentation, and then we can have questions.
Great, thank you.
Casey, could I interrupt for just a minute, just so our watchers know? I mean, we're here anyway, but so are we thinking about a half hour for this presentation?
That's right.
Okay, so just so the public knows that we will take public comment starting a little bit after 4:30. So thank you for your indulgence and patience. And go ahead.
Yeah. All right. And thanks, Suzanne, for this last minute switch. For those who are watching along, you can always access the presentation afterwards too on our PSB site. Erin, are you going off the agenda? Are you reading the agenda slides?
So, yeah, I have these first couple of slides, I think.
Okay.
All right, great. So this evening, as Dr. Marini mentioned, we want to just spend about a half an hour talking through the changes that we've made in our reopening plan based on feedback in the last week or so from the community. And so we'll quickly go through some guiding principles that have steered us along the way, some updates around health and safety, list our recommendation for moving forward. Our Office of Teaching and Learning will spend some time talking through academics. We'll spend a little bit of time on social, emotional, and physical wellness, and then go through our next steps. And so here are some guiding principles that have, again, helped us, steered us along the way. We are prioritizing the health and safety of our students, staff, and our families first. We want to provide a robust and seamless academic experience and peer cohort for all students, regardless of what learning model they're enrolled in. We want to bring students back in person as public health and facilities establish their safety, prioritizing our youngest and most vulnerable students first, and simplifying choices that students and families need to make, as well as making sure social emotional wellness is at the foundation for student success. So we've talked a lot about health and safety in our meetings that we've had over the last couple of weeks. What I'm going to just present for you here is some of the challenges that we've uncovered as we've talked through with our local experts, our internal teams, our expert panels, and all of you. And these will be familiar, right? So we want to ensure that all schools are equipped with windows and HVAC systems or portable filtration systems that are safe and appropriate for students and staff being in their classrooms. It is likely that it won't be till October until all of our classrooms in the district are updated. We've decided on 6 feet of physical distance for students and staff in the classroom, so that does limit the number of people we can actually have in the class. It also gives us some additional staff space and furniture constraints or potential budgetary purchases that we would need to make based on these distance requirements. We've talked a lot about the use of outdoor space over the last couple of meetings. It's still a little bit uncertain to us. We had talked about tent purchases in our last meeting. We need to look at available locations for those. And also a challenge for us is the change in instructional practice that would need to happen when we're moving kids from a classroom indoors to an outdoor space underneath a tent. And then obviously the changing level of the community spread is something that will always become a challenge or always is a challenge for us as we're moving forward. Hopefully that spread goes down, but obviously we're monitoring those things moving forward. And before Casey goes into the summary, into more details about our recommendation, I just want to give the folks on the call just a high-level summary here. So we have decided to recommend that BEEP, so our pre-K students and our most vulnerable students, which we'll give you a definition for later, will begin the school year in person. So in the buildings, in their own school buildings, in person with their teachers. The remainder of our students in grades K through 12 will begin the year fully remote. So fully remote at home. That's K through 12, which is a change from some of our previous presentations where we were recommending K to 2 be in person. So again, starting the school year fully remote for kindergarten through 12th grade. During this remote time, there will be opportunities for in-person connections with their peers and our staff outside of their school buildings. That's kind of what we're calling the remote plus. And then as health and safety benchmarks are met, as buildings become more safe, as classrooms meet those benchmarks, we will phase into a hybrid learning model throughout the fall, again, when those benchmarks are met. And by hybrid, I do mean that something like half of the class would come back a certain amount of time to the school building, while half of the class would be at home. Again, that's due to those spacing constraints and physical distance requirements that we need to meet. And then finally, school hours will remain the same as fall 2019. That means we will not end school at 1 o'clock, which is what we had presented a week or two ago. In one of our recommendations, we will have the full school day for all students in K-12.
Great, thanks, Erin. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Marini mentioned, the plan that we are recommending to the committee is a remote plus model, and it's plus because it allows us to target certain populations as we continue in the remote environment. The slide here in front of you covers 3 key components of the remote plus plan. As Erin mentioned, our recommendation is to open fully remote for K-12 students. For students in BEEP, we are planning to bring them back all to their respective sites. And then for K-12 students who are remote, the baseline is an outstanding remote education. I mentioned this at the last school committee meeting, but what we did in the spring was really teach during an emergency remotely. And what we're doing in the fall now is to remotely teach. We start off like that, and then the plan is to strategically ease into a hybrid model by grade as classrooms are ready. By doing this, we really believe that we can better ensure the academic experience is seamless regardless of health and safety needs. We have been and we continue to be nimble with the changing conditions that Dr. Marini referenced. We know that whatever the fall brings will entail change. And by starting students off on a solid remote learning plan, it gives us the time and space to prepare thoughtfully to bring students back in person. Next slide, please. So a note about the most vulnerable students through K-12 in our district. While we're planning for the large majority of K-12 students to be fully remote, we do have an obligation to plan for more for our most vulnerable students. You'll notice that there's been a shift in language from students with high needs to our most vulnerable students. High needs definition really comes more from a student's IEP, and we know that we have students with significant and complex needs who might not be on IEPs. And what we are aiming to do is to identify students who fall under the categories in front of you and prioritize bringing them back in person along with our students who are in the BEEP program. We believe that we have about 300 students who fall under one or more of these categories, and this is K-12. We're currently working with principals and hopefully with teachers soon on the staffing model and scheduling for these roughly 300 students. It may be that we start the year off with paraprofessionals supporting students in classrooms while they're receiving their remote education. We think that being back in a familiar setting with familiar faces is a good start, and we would build from there when we have a better understanding of teacher and specialist availability. Next slide, please. So here's an overview of the phases of the Remote Plus plan. Beginning on September 1st, we will have staff back so that we can focus on protocol training and additional professional development. Phase 1 right now is set to begin on September 16th, which is subject to change and maybe a day or two earlier as we continue to gather a bit more information. BEEP and the most vulnerable students would come in person, and all other K-12 students would be remote. Sometime in the early fall, when we have more accurate information on classroom readiness, we will ask parents at that point to make a choice. The choice would be to either go remote or remain fully remote and enter into a remote learning academy, which would be explained further along in the presentation by Michelle Herman. Next slide, please. So here's a timeline that represents the remote plus model. You'll see that we have BEAT and the most vulnerable students fully in person. All other K-12 students would begin remote, and then again, at some point in the early fall, there would be a decision point that we ask parents and guardians to make, which we hope won't last too long, but this again allows for some seamlessness and continuity in our students' learning experience this year. Next slide, please. So why phasing in? In addition to adding in deciding to add in a phase-in model, we did use input from our own staff. Dr. Marini, some of you may know, held a town hall for the entire district staff to gather more information about what their concerns are and to also take input. We also had access to many community experts and community members who have written to us, as well as that from the town's Department of Public Health. Of course, we're also following state and national data and what we have in terms of known research about how children respond to COVID, and equally as important, how important it is for staff and students to remain connected to their communities at school. At least in my life these days, there seems to be a new headline every hour the last couple of weeks about how daunting the task is to reopen school districts. Quite honestly, they are logistical nightmares, but we have to do it. This is the plan that we wholeheartedly believe will allow us to not just balance, but meet all of the current needs of staff and students. In terms of ventilation, we do have more information about that than we did at the last school committee meeting. One is we have a clearer picture of the modifications to our classrooms, most classrooms, but not all, that we need to make in order to improve airflow and filtration in the classrooms. Again, many thanks to Dave Gayshak, Elena Savoya, Joe Allen, and Panel 4 experts for your time and dedication. I don't think we would have the breadth and depth of information that we would had it not be for these experts who so graciously volunteered their time, expertise, and energies. Some of the fixes that we'll need to address are repairing windows, HVAC replacements, and the procurement of portable HEPA filters. Our facilities team has already begun to work to ensure that the airflow and exchange rate in each of our classrooms is appropriate and safe for all staff and students to return. So over the next few slides, I'll go into a little bit more detail about what each phase entails and what it means for students, families, and staff. What you see here is in the preparation phase, the respective departments that will be reaching out to families to ensure that families have what they need to start the school year off both remotely and then for those populations that are coming back in full. You'll see, for example, here we have special education staff that will begin to contact families to coordinate IEP services and for some accommodations. We'll also provide training and video support to students and families so that we know that they have access to email, instructional platforms, and other instructional software. On the staff side, we do want them to continue engaging in professional development to prepare for a year that is different than most others. Of course, we have to continue to prepare our classrooms. Curriculum coordinators also will continue to work with school staff on expectations and curricula for remote learning. And then, of course, our principals will work to finalize daily and weekly schedules for remote learning. In phase one, again, the tentative date now is September 16th. Our youngest learners and our most vulnerable learners in K-12 will begin in-person learning. Full remote learning will begin for all other K-12 students. In addition to that, each school will create in-person opportunities that will take place outside on each of the school's campuses. We do hear and agree with folks who are pushing us to really consider face-to-face interactions before we can't. This time here, we hope will allow teachers and students to build community. And of course, if students and families continue to require additional technical support, we'll be here to provide that. On the staff side, our educators will begin teaching either in person or remotely. Phase 2 will begin when we have approval from the town's Department of Public Health and a full review by expert panel 4. This is when we will survey families and ask them to select one of the 2 options, either to remain fully remote or in which case they would transition to a remote learning academy or to a hybrid model. So let me just repeat that. This is the point when we would ask families to select one of 2 options: to remain fully remote, in which case they would transition to a remote learning academy, which we'll go deeper into, or a hybrid model. So this is the phase when we would begin bringing students back into a hybrid model by grade level, again, pending approval from the Department of Public Health and a review from panel 4. On the right side is what families can expect from staff. We do want to schedule regular check-ins with families so that we have more accurate information on what students' growing needs are and how remote learning is going. We know both the committee and the community have asked us for more clarity on academics, specifically what instruction will look like, what to expect as a parent or guardian. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Herman to speak more on that.
I am actually going to pass it to Meg. Did we lose Meg?
Sorry about that. Hi. We've been doing a lot of preparation in anticipation of the 2021 school year. And as you can see from this slide, the variety of opportunities that our teachers and coordinators have participated in and designed. It's important to note that this slide represents a great partnership between the district, the Innovation Fund at the Brookline High School, and also the Brookline Education Foundation. If it weren't for the Innovation Fund and the Brookline Education Foundation, we wouldn't have been able to do all of this amazing work. We have had the BEF funded specialized reading program trainings and contributed generously to the work of PK to 12 curriculum coordinators through sponsoring direct content-specific professional development with K to 8 coordinators and funding the unconference at Brookline High School. The BEF also supported the professional development with technology for K to 5 teachers. We also have the Innovation Fund, which gave a very generous gift for the teachers and coordinators at the high school to conduct a variety of really innovative learning experiences. And I'm not sure if Anthony, you wanted to just add a little bit about that, an example of that? Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next slide then. So again, our coordinators have been working really hard with teacher teams to revise and adapt and narrow the focus of the curriculum. We want to make sure that our current work is focusing on positioning our instruction and our teachers to be successful through December, from the opening of school through December. And this is going to be ongoing work in the Office of Teaching and Learning. We're narrowing the standards and revising our curriculum across the district with the goal of providing a seamless PK to 12 experience. Coordinators are examining current lessons and identifying which instructional strategies that they need to use for each learning environment. So for example, what's the most effective use of Zoom breakout rooms? When is it most effective to employ synchronous or asynchronous instruction? When is it most appropriate for students using a Padlet? So before in-person instruction, students might use Post-it notes, but now with remote instruction, they could use a Padlet. So thank you. I'm going to pass this on to Michelle.
Mm-hmm. And just one of the things I want to mention, we will continue as our structures develop going towards the opening of school. We will continue to be working with Panel 3 to support the learning of teachers and the community in order to be prepared. So when we think about instruction for the upcoming year, I want to assure people that the instruction is still going to be driven by the district goal and our vision and our mission. And they're here so that we can remind ourselves, as Casey said, that we're returning to what's really important to us around learning. Can you go to the next slide?
Michelle, it's Anthony. Do you mind? I had some trouble with my audio and I left Meg hanging. Do you mind if I quickly? So sorry about that, Meg, and sorry, everybody. I'm glad that I wasn't being recorded when I couldn't get my audio working. I used some choice vocabulary words. I think one, as Meg said, the BHS Innovation Fund and the BEF were tremendously thoughtful and generous. In terms of the Innovation Fund, they contributed $56,000 to our 5 core subject areas, so world language, math, science, social studies, and English. We had teacher teams representing those departments, working with our CTE curriculum coordinator, Britt Stevens, and then with educators from our EL, our English language department, and from special education. And there were 5 sort of core pieces of that work. One was to evaluate the efficacy of remote learning in the spring, to really learn lessons from what, as Asa Sebelius, the principal of Heath School this morning, described more as emergency teaching or emergency remote learning. So evaluate the efficacy, then create 2-week community development plans for as we begin 2021. So we believe strongly that we want to do relationship before task. So thinking about that within classrooms and beyond. As I've mentioned a couple of times, supporting learners in executive functioning skills and approaches, and a much more coordinated approach to that. And this speaks to something Andy asked about last week, which is diagnostics. And so especially for 8th to 9th grade, but creating assessments that help us recognize where kids need additional support. And then creating some asynchronous lessons and units. And finally, we're sharing a great deal with staff at the beginning of the year, sharing some of that learning. The BEF then complemented that support by really targeting the departments and programs that weren't a part of the Innovation Fund. So guidance, special ed was, but more support for special ed, looking at how tutorial functions, SWS, ACE. So I would just say, knowing that this is a 30-minute presentation, and I can talk for a long time, I will say I've never seen the faculty and staff of Brookline High School work in a more committed manner than they have this summer. And I'm super excited about next year, no matter how we start, because I know our teachers are working incredibly hard. So sorry to interrupt.
No, and Anthony, just to that note, so you'll see a number on this slide of 790 participants. That does not include the work at the high school yet, because we haven't done their attendance. So with the unconference that they're holding, we will be closer to about 900 to 950 participants or seats taken during professional development just in this summer alone. So thank you.
Thank you.
So if we just return back here, and Anthony set us up very well, there's a commitment to returning to meeting the goals of instruction that were shown in the slide before. And one of the things that I brought this slide back for was to remind us that the curriculum was built initially to meet the vision and mission of the district. We have spent this summer looking at that curriculum and being able to narrow it down. But what I wanted to just pull out was that we've added the executive functioning, because in this remote world, we need to support students in being able to be independent when they are taking their classes from a remote area. So can we go to the next slide, please? So we want to be really clear about what families will and should expect from the school district within this remote environment. So instruction will still be delivered by a schedule, and we'll be showing you a sample shortly. Families can expect that students will be engaging in different structures for learning throughout the day. Much like an in-person model, there'll be opportunities for full whole group instruction, small group instruction, independent work, and opportunities to build community. So as you'll see on this slide, attendance and participation will be required. And another piece that Casey began to point out is that when we transition back into a live setting where students are live, we will be able to use the schedule that is built to create a hybrid schedule for students once we return to school. Can you go to the next slide? So continuing with the expectation, throughout the school day, your educators will use multiple modalities to deliver instruction. Students will experience synchronous lessons with the entire class or in small group, asynchronous instruction, which would still be driven by the teacher, and they'll provide the materials, and independent work time. I just want to make a note here. Independent work time is meant to be built so that students can access it. If it requires that an adult be in the home to access that learning, that is a very good data point for us. That means that we need to adjust that instruction. In addition, students will turn in assignments, which they will receive feedback and grading on. And then the other thing that will change is that and this is based on information we heard from the spring, all K2 students will be using a Seesaw platform for instruction, which means that's the delivery method the teachers will use. Grades 3 through 5 will use Google, and grades 6 through 12 will all be on Canvas. So there will be a common platform for both teachers and students. Move to the next slide, please. So giving you a moment just to look, this is a sample of a K5 schedule. And the goal is to start with this schedule remotely and then adjust it slightly so that it will work for the hybrid. Students will, again, have time that's blocked out for classes. However, I want to be really clear about what it means to block out time for a classroom. These are designed to ensure that students have adequate time for learning and for the teacher to be able to be available for instruction. For example, the math lessons are scheduled for an hour. There may be approximately 15-minute lesson delivered by the teacher. Students might then break into small groups to work together, receive intervention, or work on their own. The time is intentionally blocked so that the necessary support staff, whether it be a paraprofessional or a special educator, be available to be engaged with the lesson. So that is the reason that this is showing as a block of time. And the same is true for specialists. You'll also notice that there are movement breaks throughout the day and that there is a specialist time throughout the day that will also be delivered remotely. If we go to the next slide, it's just a continuation of the current model, but what you will see is that there is time for synchronous and independent learning within every block of time. Anthony, do you want to talk a little to the high school scheduling? You want me to move on? So Anthony appears to be unable to remove his mute.
I just come back to it, Michelle. If he gets.
Okay, that's great. So if we move to the last slide. So we just want to remind people of the benefits and things that we would need to do in order to do this. Our goal is to be able to move seamlessly between an in-person and remote setting. Since we're talking about beginning in the remote setting, it's the ability to move back into the classroom setting. Our students are going to receive high quality instruction for full days. They will have time when they're online. They will have time when they're working independently. They'll have time when they work in small groups. The schedule provides the structure so that students get used to a school day and having structures and routines. We're going to use our current K-8 staff, and students will stay with their cohort at the beginning of the year. If they identify that they will move into the remote academy, only then would the cohort shift. And then another piece is that the way that the curriculum is set up, it allows for schools to respond to the changing conditions of education. So for instance, if a student chooses, or a family chooses to have a student enter the remote academy, that remote academy will be able to pick up on instruction right where the student left off based on the fact that we have a common curriculum. So this will require some work on our end. We're going to need to have significant staff and time and ongoing supports for instructional materials so that people are ready to work. We're going to need to define our staff. So as we assign paraprofessionals, they clearly have their work identified within their role, and that would work for any teacher. We have some investments to make in some additional materials. So there are some very specific platforms and curriculum supports that that work very well on remote. You'll see some examples there: Newsela, Raz, Kids, Zoom, Padlet, any of those tools. That's an additional investment. And then we're going to need clarity in our MOU in order to determine what does live teaching mean and what are the parameters around that. So
Michelle, after you're finished, I can go back to the high school schedule, but go ahead and keep going.
All right, let me just add this last piece around the Remote Learning Academy because it's very quick. Erin, if you just go to the next slide, and then Anthony, you can go back to the schedule. So the Remote Learning Academy, as you recall, when we were talking earlier, we identified that once the conditions changed and we would be able to return to a hybrid model in schools, we were going to give families the option to either go into that hybrid model or become part of the remote academy. So at that time, students would be assigned to classrooms in the remote academy. The model and the schedule will stay the same as their current classrooms, and that's the way that this hybrid remote curriculum and instructional model has been designed. The staffing model will be determined based on faculty who either opt into that or cannot return to their buildings for health and safety reasons. We will continue having grade levels work together in order to maintain a consistent experience for students across the district. And then students that are enrolled in the remote academy will be given the same opportunities to attend in-person and outdoor activities with their peers. So I'm going to let Anthony come back and talk about the high school.
Great, thanks, Michelle. So I want to begin the same way that Hal, who's our scheduling maestro, began last week, and that is to emphasize these are drafts, that while we've shared our proof of concept schedules with school committee and in these presentations and with our senior cabinet and expanded senior cabinet and coordinators, all of our curriculum coordinators, we've yet to share and get feedback from our entire faculty and staff. Some of that is because some of these issues that we're presenting or some of these ideas are dependent on what the memorandum of agreement between the school committee and the union, how that evolves. So you're looking, in the case of Schedule 8A, you're looking at, this was feedback from our coordinators that were interested in a 21 block schedule, so 7 blocks A through G, each with 3 periods. And at the bottom, you can see Hal wrote the teachers would use 2 of the 3 blocks in each class as instructional time. The third class would be student support. I want to change some of that language or approach it in a different way and say that absolutely there will be synchronous learning opportunities. We think there are crucial activities to do live with students. And there's also asynchronous learning that will have students engaged in a remote environment. And so the idea is to support that through this schedule. And then if we can go to the one that we looked at last week, 7B, which Hal has labeled remote, you'll notice that the blocks are on top of each other. And so that we only have 3 blocks meeting on Monday. The idea is, especially within a remote environment, we don't want to overwhelm students with screen time or with excessive blocks on the same day. And so building in, say, A1, which could be a synchronous block in which the teacher is framing the lesson and saying, here's what we're going to learn today. Then maybe it's use of breakout groups, especially say in math or in world language. And then there might be a companion piece to that lesson in A2 that would support learning as well. You'll notice also, as you have before, that there's an X block, which we think is tremendously important in terms of fostering community and social emotional learning. That too will be embedded in all classes and all subject areas. And then we believe it is crucial to have weekly collaboration time because no doubt teachers will need to be working within departments and within subject area teams to develop common curriculum, look at assessments together, and generally teams so that there is less variance and more common experiences. Those are the schedules that we have at this point. We absolutely will need more feedback from our faculty and staff. They're eager to get in there and give us some feedback, but that's at least a look at those 2 schedules.
Thank you so much, Anthony.
So in the final slides, I just want to take some time to talk about students and staff, really social, emotional, and physical wellness. We did mention these topics back in July, I think, when we started these presentations, but realized we've kind of veered off of them to things more around, ventilation and scheduling. So we just want to make sure that it's, very clear that we recognize the importance of social, emotional, and physical wellness, especially as students are coming back into school, regardless of what that mode or model will be. So in terms of physical wellness, we really will do our best to utilize or maximize outdoor space where it's safe and appropriate for students and staff. Regardless of in-home or in-person, we will provide movement breaks, as Michelle mentioned and showed you in her sample schedule for students and staff. We do recognize that we need to plan more specific and intentional physical education when students are fully remote, not in the school buildings, and we will work with teachers in the Office of Teaching and Learning on this, as well as when students are in person, based on some health and safety requirements, we will need to alter or shift away from some team sports or shared equipment in phys ed. So again, we'll have to work with our internal staff in order to make sure we meet those requirements during phys ed. As we shift over to social emotional wellness, we recognize that we do have to spend time building relationships and community that's going to be very important at the beginning of school. The Office of Student Support and their guidance team has selected a universal screener for students in BEEP through K-12 that they will start administering sometime around the end of September, early October. Brookline's tiered system of supports has been adapted and strengthened to meet the anticipated increased needs of students this school year. And then a couple of other bullet points towards the bottom here, seeking community supports, encouraging positive use of technology, validating disappointment, helping find ways to keep mind and body healthy are a couple of the main things that Expert Panel 2 in particular spent some time talking about and shared with us over the last couple of weeks. And finally, what's still to come. So we alluded to a handful of next steps during the presentation, but I will outline them for you here. We will plan for our classroom update with facilities and operations. That work has already begun with Matt Gillis and his team and our partners. We will continue town discussions around COVID-19 testing for staff and for students, finalizing school schedules and logistics, things like staffing, space, tents, furniture for classrooms, continue with curriculum and PD planning, begin to set benchmarks with the Brookline Department of Health. So those are those benchmarks that will help us determine whether or not we move from remote into that gradual phasing in of grade levels into in-person learning. We do have negotiations with the BEU. The memorandum of understanding was mentioned a couple of times throughout the presentation this afternoon. We do still need to work with our extended day representatives to make determinations around what that would look like in our school buildings. And then finally, you all know this, on Wednesday, we have another meeting. And then our submission to DESE is technically due on Friday, 14th, so this coming Friday.
So that's our presentation. Suzanne, would you like, I guess we'll take your lead in terms of where you'd like to go next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we're going to go to public comment because we promised the public they would be first, so we put them second. So we'll do that, and then we'll come back and do our questioning deliberations. So I want to say thank you. Obviously, you've done a ton of work. It looks quite different from what we saw before. So you've obviously listened to many, many stakeholders. We have gotten a ton of emails, I have to say, and we ask the community to bear in mind that it's going to be hard to please everyone. We may not please anyone, but we're really going to try hard. And so tonight, we're not going to take a vote. That will be Wednesday. So when the committee comes on, when we have our turn, I would like us to, think about those questions that we have that have not been answered yet, some thoughts around where we think we might tweak it, where we might have other suggestions. So we will do all that after we have public comment. So we're going to do public comment like we did before. I will call on the person who's up and then tell you who's up next so they can be ready. Robin's going to unmute them as they come. We have a lot of people tonight, so we are going to do 2 minutes. You get 2 minutes to speak. So David Perlman, give me a thumbs up if you can do that for us. Thank you very much. And we will begin. So our first speaker is Laura Basilio, and then after her is Jillian Cargill. And if the speakers could, you should say your name just so we get it right. And also just your connection, if you could. Community member, family member of a student, staff member. It just helps us know who people are. Thank you. Go ahead, Laura. Robin, is Laura unmuted?
I am trying to unmute her. I have an issue there, but.
Oh, something happened. Laura, I think, oops.
Hello?
Laura, you're on. It's your turn.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you to the school committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Laura Basilio. I am a Brookline resident, parent to a rising kindergartner, and a second grader with autism at Lincoln, and a teacher at a most beloved Lawrence school. I was going to speak to you to urge you to begin the year remotely. I want to thank Casey and Michelle and their team for their thoughtful presentation, which I am sure many will agree is a great start based on sound judgment and science. I would also like to thank the community members listening who have shared their support for the teachers and students of Brookline. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. To those hiding behind your computer screens from the comfort and safety of your own homes, tearing down our amazing teachers on Facebook pages, I ask you, where is your compassion and understanding? Your hurtful comments and accusations border on cyberbullying as you present your alternate facts. How many of you have ever spent time as a teacher in a public school classroom? How many of you have done so during a global pandemic? How many of you would have planned remote learning perfectly on your first go around? Why would you trust us to educate your children this fall in a building, but not out of it? And will you blame teachers for being underprepared to teach remotely, which, as many said in our last meeting and this meeting, is inevitable, when we weren't given the time to prepare that we asked for? A few short months ago, teachers were hailed as underpaid and underappreciated heroes, and now, because the economy is suffering, our lives are seen as sacrificial and only valued to serve the misguided ideas some have about what a return to school will look and feel like. We have become teachers because it is a calling, our passion, a dedication, and the only meaningful way we see to spend our careers and our lives. Make no mistake, we love your children. As another U.S. educator so perfectly stated, after Sandy Hook, we realized and accepted that any of us would take a bullet for your children. We cannot be asked to bring those bullets home. As a single parent, the school closure has had a profound impact on my family. To say this experience has been traumatic for us would be an understatement. As a teacher, I worked first year of teaching, often in the middle of the night or in the wee hours of the morning when my thing like in-person teaching, and many acquired over my fifth.
If you can please wrap up, you're over 2 minutes.
Sympathy, but to illustrate, possibly no one may want to return to schools more than I do, and yet I'm speaking to you to urge you to accept what Casey and her teams presented. I'm simply not ready. There are too many unanswered questions and too many safety issues need to be addressed before we can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Jillian, you're next, and then Carol Seidman.
I muted you because you're.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Jillian. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the school committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jillian Cargill. I have spent most of my life in Brookline Public Schools, having attended them from K-12 and having spent 16 years as a Brookline educator. Today, I would specifically like to address the concerns of many about students accessing learning, especially given the presentation we just listened to. I know it has been mentioned, but the spring was not true remote learning. It was crisis teaching. And with this time, I would like to offer a look at the stark difference in accessing learning through in-person and true remote learning. I am by nature a problem solver. I can't is usually not a phrase that comes out of my mouth, but in the case of in-person learning right now, I can't stop using the phrase I can't. I can't teach a child to read from 6 feet away. I can't see the words that they're sounding out. I can't sit next to them and point out to the letters, the picture cues, break apart syllables. I can't teach children math from 6 feet away. I can't point to the objects with them as they count. I can't teach students writing from 6 feet away if I can't see what's on their paper. I can't provide routine when I am forced to quarantine multiple times, moving in between in-person and remote every time a child or a teacher is symptomatic, providing routine when substitute teachers, assuming we'll have any, are taking over my class for 2 weeks at a time when I have to quarantine or I have to quarantine with my children or my husband. In-person learning will be stripped of any capacity to individually meet children's needs, and promoting in-person learning by claiming it will provide access to learning shows little knowledge of what actually makes learning accessible. So what can I do? Like many educators, I spent my summer on my own time learning how to provide meaningful access to content remotely. As supported by the presentation earlier, remotely I can independently assess students' math and literacy skills. I can provide small group math and literacy instruction with shared texts and tailored math lessons, giving on-the-spot feedback. I can confer with small writing groups, view their work, and offer suggestions. I can provide routine. I can meet the needs of individual learners. I'm grateful for the change in the proposed model and the focus that it places on the cans, and I hope that the school committee will vote to start remotely. Thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you, Jillian. Carol, you're up, and then Senator Mendoza.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Carol, go ahead.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to everybody for their hard work. I've been following a lot of these meetings, as some of you know, since you've been on the other end, and I am incredibly grateful for all the work being done. I have reached out to Dr. Marini and the school committee via letter, and I'll just read the letter for the record and then hope that I could get a response at some point. I actually wrote this last week after the school committee meeting last week. I said, I watched the school committee meeting last night. Like you, I'm impressed with the talent and commitment to educational excellence in Brookline. Since I know you, Dr. Marini, have an immense amount on your plate, I'll be brief and to the point. As a parent of twin boys on the autism spectrum who attend Brookline High and a disability advocate for over 40 years, my focus concerns special education. Last night, Dr. Abramovitz was bringing forth her concerns for her own students as well as others regarding special services. Unfortunately, the discussion became heated and then derailed. I do appreciate you promising to set up a meeting specifically to address special education. Since approximately 15 to 20% of Brookline students receive such services, this time is of the essence. Please specify when you and the school committee might hold such a meeting, as what time and what date might the parents of special ed students rely on. I want to thank you for your time and great efforts to serve our children, and I look forward to your earliest response. Carol Seidman. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a parent, obviously. I'm a sign language interpreter for almost 40 years and been in the disability community for as long. So that's and we live in Brookline. So that's my background. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Jennifer is up next, then Kevin McKenzie.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Hi, this is Esther Mendoza. I am a Florida Ruff and Ridley School parent. I am also the Florida Ruff and Ridley School CPAC representative, which means that I serve on the Special Education Parents Advisory Committee to ensure that special education parents have a voice. To echo Carol's sentiment as well, who I also have the pleasure of serving on CPAC with, we would like to push the administration and school committee to make that time to meet with special education parents, if at all possible, before the vote, because there has not been a formalized, as far as I know, process to put our input into this. I would also like to highlight, I reached out to the FRR school to try and make this comment as inclusive as possible. So what I'm hearing from other parents, please reach out to the parents of children on IEPs and 504s, no matter what plan you implement for the fall, because while teaching any child at home is difficult, these parents have also been speech therapists, OTs, physical therapists, and all the other things that our children need. And whatever plan you do decide to roll out, please do not lose the completely essential mission of inclusion that serves as a cornerstone for our district. It is easy when trying to address needs to slip into a seclusionary or segregationist model. And I encourage you to please keep inclusion at the forefront of your mind. As Carol also highlighted, children on IEPs and 504s are almost 20% of our district, and we are naturally underrepresented in town conversations like this, not only because special needs parents are traditionally overtaxed both financially and time-wise, but because we are underrepresented on the school committee and in the way that our administration is structured, and there's only so much advocacy Casey can do in each meeting to represent almost 20% of the population. I will also say, please act quickly, because this problem is already being solved by parents. Pods are being formed, teachers are being hired, and private school admissions are being filed. And that is just increasing the ability gap in our school system by the day. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Kevin is up, and then Stephanie Barron.
Hello, my name is Kevin McKenzie, and I'm a para at the Lawrence School. While I largely agree with the remote plus reopening plan, I do have some concerns. These concerns largely are related to issues that will pop up with the new memorandum agreement with the BEU and what that will ultimately look like. There are so many outstanding issues that need to be addressed to make this model work as designed. There is no guarantee that this is going to happen as desired by those who have drafted this plan. With a vote on Wednesday, it is unlikely they will be answered and resolved in time. As such, the safest and most reasonable way to start the school year is for everyone, all staff and all students, to start remotely until an MOA is agreed upon that addresses these concerns. 10 days at the beginning of September, weeks after a vote on the plan, is just not enough time to figure this all out should circumstances change related to that agreement. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kevin. Stephanie, you're up, and then Thomas Coleman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Stephanie.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Barron. I teach 5th grade at the Ruffin Ridley School, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'd like to start off by saying that I'd love nothing more than to return to my school building next month to welcome my next cohort of 9 and 10-year-olds in person. I say this because I share with confidence that remote teaching was the most challenging teaching I've ever done, and the thought of having to return to it isn't a welcomed one. My colleagues and I dove headfirst into a modality of teaching none of us had ever experienced. We failed gracefully each day as we explored and navigated new ways to engage and motivate students from afar. And we experienced levels of stress and frustration that we will never forget. We shared innumerable struggles while working the longest days and weeks and months of our careers, with most of us not taking a single day off for the sake of ourselves or our sanities. Even with all this, I'd gladly go back to remote teaching rather than to participate in a feeble attempt to battle a virus that has absolutely ravaged communities and has killed over 8,700 Bay Staters to date. I don't declare this attempt feeble in regards to the amount of work that folks at Town Hall are doing right now to prepare to open schools back up for in-person learning. That work is acknowledged and greatly respected. I declare it feeble because folks are trying to battle a novel virus that sparked a global pandemic that nobody in the room has ever had any experience with combating. So it just doesn't make sense to risk the health of teachers and students until more successes have been experienced and shared first. I greatly appreciate the presentation that Casey Miller and colleagues just gave, as it reaffirms that Brookline is not yet ready to open its doors to full in-person learning. There is one still important piece missing, however, the entry to school guideline, which is significantly lacking still. All students and staff should be completing symptom attestations each day they plan to be at school. Without some form of daily attestation protocol put in place, those who are symptomatic or infected have the potential to enter our buildings and shed the virus amongst the community. That is dangerous. The public schools of Brookline are not yet prepared enough to open its doors to teachers and students in an attempt at in-person learning with certainty that we can all remain safe until lives are at stake. And opening the schools back up amongst the scramble would unfortunately end up being negligent. On a more personal note, I'm married to a nurse at the Brigham who worked in the COVID ICU for 4 hellish weeks in April and who very well could be redeployed to work again because Boston area hospitals are anticipating and preparing for another surge in COVID cases in the upcoming months. I am just one of the probable hundreds of members of our learning community who lives with a member of the medical community gearing up for another round versus COVID. And when this happens, the potential for COVID to enter my home will skyrocket. If we return to in-person learning, the hundreds of us who live with members of the medical community become potential spreaders of the virus to our students and colleagues. Why are we risking our students and their families with this? We saw what COVID did to our community the first time around, and I'm baffled as to why the public schools of Brookline are entertaining the thought of taking a gamble against COVID. Have we not seen enough that this virus wins out most times? School committee members, you are elected officials who were selected to serve the common good, and the most good for this community at this time is to cast a vote that protects the lives of the children of Brookline, their families, and those of us who have devoted our lives to teaching them. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thomas, you're up next, and then Agnes Alvarola.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Thomas Coleman. I'm the father of a soon-to-be first grader in Brookline. I was actually gonna talk about how I found the plan that was presented last week very well balanced. To be honest, I after hearing what I heard today, I I'm quite disappointed, to be honest. I was going to say that I saw a plan in line with public health experts' guidance. I don't seem to see that anymore. I was going to say that it was a plan that put the interest of our children first by striving to get as many back in school as possible. I don't see that anymore. I was going to say that I saw a plan that when we return to in-person instruction, it would focus on safety and well-being of everyone, children, teachers, and other staff. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore because there's no date for any return to in-person instruction. I wanted to remind everyone that in Massachusetts, the test positivity rate is below 2%. In Brookline, it's below 1%. It's 0.85%. I'm not an infectious disease expert, but if you listen to the expert, the CDC has said that extended school closures are harmful to children, and available evidence provides reason to believe that in-person schooling is in the best interest of students. Tony Fauci has said that if you're in one of the areas of low transmission, you can get back to school with the kinds of precautions that you do in general society. The Mass Department of Education has said that we want to start the school year with as many of our students as possible returning to in-person settings. And with the input of infectious disease experts, they have put in their guidance that they believe the risk of transmission in schools is likely lower than the risk of transmission in many other settings. I was going to say a lot of other things, but I think I'm going to skip to the end and say, if this committee chooses not to support a plan with in-person instruction, how can I look my 6-year-old son in the eye and with any fact-based rationale tell him that his parents can go out to dinner on a Friday night, even sitting inside, that his neighbor can go to the fitness center or the hairdresser, that people can go to the casino, but he cannot go back to school because schools are only being prioritized for reopening together with nightclubs. How can I look my 6-year-old son in the eyes and tell him that his sister can go back to preschool and actually has been able to go for quite some time, but he can't go back to school? How can I teach my 6-year-old that school is important if all he is to experience is being left to an iPad a couple hours a day? I would like to remind everyone that the decision for the school committee should not be one of safety. Expert after expert at all levels, including the health experts engaged by Brookline that informed the last plan, apparently not the plan that was presented today, and I'm perplexed what changed over the last week, have stated that with the right precaution, the risk is very low. You even heard Tony Fauci saying that it's lower than it is in general society. The decision of the school committee should be to do what's best for our children, and what's best for our children is in-person instruction. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Agnes, you're up, and then Martina McGrath.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you. My name is Agnes Alberola, and I've taught for the past 40 years, almost every grade from kindergarten through seniors. I've been an assistant principal, and for the past 17 years, I've been coordinating the world language program and teaching French at Brookline High School. I'm encouraged with the new Remote Plus plan. In spite of all my experience and research, I cannot fathom how to create an effective, safe, and supportive environment inside a school building during a pandemic. Let's picture it. With my French students all wearing masks 6 feet apart, I cannot hear the kid in the back, and they cannot comfortably practice speaking with one another. I can't provide feedback or support in a private way. We can't see each other smile. Unable to share materials physically, students look at electronic documents. I am also staring at a screen so that the other half of the class who are at home can access the lesson. How absurd and how stressful when we could safely do better in a remote environment. A bathroom break, a cough, a doorknob, a hug become reasons to worry, and time used following hospital-style protocols in a building still in construction. God forbid the fire alarm would sound, and now we all rush out, crowding hallways and cross-contaminating each other. Imagine instead, in a Remote Plus environment, my students are safely home, sitting in front of the same laptop that they would have used in class in unsafe conditions. We can see each other's faces. We start class with a quick game to build community. Next, my friend, a judge in Paris, joins us on Zoom to answer questions. 15 minutes later, in breakout groups, students compare the French and American justice systems. I join, praise, and guide as I bounce from group to group. The next day, students record their recommendation to improve on our justice system, all done in French on Canvas. There is hope. This summer, thanks to the Innovation Fund, I, along with 30 of my high school colleagues, spent 3 weeks researching, sharing, and making recommendations for best practices to teach remotely. Regular virtual meetings will be set up. Students will be assessed and graded, and community building activities incorporated. Even under the best of safety conditions, which we are far from meeting now, teaching face-to-face, or should I say mask to mask under COVID-19 is not a sound construct. Instead of wasting millions of dollars on an ineffective and temporary hybrid solution, I urge the school committee to use our limited budget and time to help educators prepare the best possible remote education for our high school students until better in-person conditions are possible. The Remote Plus plan gives me hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Martina is up, and then Alice Cunnahome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Martina McGrath. I'm a resident of Brookline. I'm the mother of a soon-to-be first grader and twins who are hoping to enter kindergarten at Baker School this year. I have to say I was greatly heartened when I saw the original reopening plan, which to me seemed to be balanced based on the science and the risk and the needs of our children. And I am beyond disappointed at what has been presented here today. Our youngest children, particularly those in K2, have the lowest risks of infection, they have the lowest risks of transmission, and they have made the greatest sacrifices through this pandemic. They have the most to lose in terms of another prolonged absence from school, and they cannot learn remotely. What was presented today in terms of them sitting in front of a computer from 8 until 1:30 every day is completely unrealistic. My husband and I both work full-time. It is not possible for us to supervise our children and be teachers on top of holding down our own jobs. The thought that they will do a group instruction for 15 minutes and then a 45-minute independent study group, that may work beautifully for kids who are 10 and higher, but for kindergartners, they'll simply walk away from the computer and they will not learn. I would encourage the schools committee to think about science rather than fear, to take the emotion out of this, and please look at the facts. We currently are in an enviable position in Massachusetts, where we have very little COVID community transmission. We don't have that many cases. We have an opportunity for our children to go back, to get to know their classmates, to get to know their teachers, and develop a relationship with the school. This may change later in the year. There may be a surge, I completely agree. And in that situation, we may need to flip to remote. But I would strongly encourage you to get the children back, get them into some kind of structure, allow them to set a relationship with the school, and think about their social and emotional well-being. Covering them with this fear of this virus that they cannot control, this is very unhealthy. Trying to set them up with some kind of normality and a normal structure where they meet their peers on a regular basis, this is much more healthy for them. They're used to wearing masks. Being taught through a mask, it's not that big a deal. Being taught through a computer screen, that's not going to work. Again, I would reiterate what one of the previous speakers said. Dr. Fauci has encouraged school reopenings in states where there are low levels of community transmission as to what we do. A final point I would make, and this is also responsible.
So please wrap up.
I'll stop there. Okay, thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martina. Alice is up next, and then Joshua Paradise.
Hi, my name is Alice Cunnahome. I'm a third grade teacher at the Driscoll School, and I've worked in Brookline for 6 years. Thank you for having me. I'm here to implore you to vote to secure a remote model now. The fact that there are more questions than answers about implementing a hybrid model clearly indicates it's the wrong choice, and I want to thank the district for adjusting their thinking after hearing community feedback. This issue needs to be resolved in a way that shows our educational community, both family and educators, that you value them, their lives, and their loved ones. Delaying the vote and extending the conversation about any type of hybrid return, K-2 first or otherwise, further reduces our ability to provide a quality educational experience. The community has made clear their disappointment regarding school this past spring, and I personally agree. There is not one teacher who would argue that what took place last spring was comparable to pre-pandemic schooling. However, it gave teachers the opportunity to change their thinking and work together in an entirely new way. Teachers need the time to adjust their practice to the realities of teaching during a pandemic. While the developments in the district's proposed Remote Plus plan helps bridge that gap, teachers can't plan in any meaningful way until we know what we're planning for. We are at the point where every day spent contemplating questions on tent pricing or enrollment losses due to a mixed return model or hastily constructed fail-safes means another day in which teachers such as myself don't know where to start. We are 3 weeks away from a new school year. If you decide on a remote plan today, come September, we will have had 3 more weeks of planning and preparation under our belts when we log on to Zoom. I'm sure many parents can remember a time when a staff member went above and beyond to support a student. They know what dedicated and caring educators look like. We are asking you to show us the same dedication now. Please do the only thing that ensures our safety and vote today so we can get back to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Joshua, you're up, and then Terry Jewell.
Hi, this is Joshua Paradise. Thank you. There's obviously a tremendous amount of work that's gone into the thought and the creation of all these plans. I am a parent of a rising 5th grader at Runkle, and I really appreciate that social and emotional wellness is at the foundation of what you're trying to do. I also agree that there is no solution that will make everyone happy, and perhaps a solution that will make anyone happy. But as a parent, I really do want to align to the comments of what 2 of the previous speakers, Thomas Kuhlman and Martina McGrath, said. I am extremely disappointed that there will be no option for in-person learning starting in September. I think extended school closures are extremely harmful for students. We have to prioritize what's best for our students. We have to enable other people, the teachers and the parents who want a remote option, to have that remote option. But I am extremely concerned about trying to do education for children in a way that is productive and safe and equitable without in-person instruction. So I think the questions that I would have is, how are we trying to preserve equity in this model, especially as people have already mentioned that parents are opting into private tutors? How are we creating extra challenge work? What is the measurement of success? And what is our plan to get children back into the classroom? Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. Terry, you're up next, then Adam Fried.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. I am entering my 38th year as a Brookline teacher. I am currently a literacy specialist at Lawrence School. I have been a classroom teacher, ECS resource teacher, and the K-8 English Language Arts curriculum coordinator. In addition, I am the proud parent of 2 Lincoln School graduates who also graduated from Brookline High School, the most recent a member of the class of 2020. I'd like to call your attention to something I have not heard addressed enough in these discussions, that of ensuring that all young children develop the skills and strategies to make them proficient readers. My primary responsibility at Lawrence is to provide literacy intervention for children in grades K1 and 2. It is important to point out here that literacy specialists are not special educators. We are part of regular education and support students who benefit from literacy intervention. If we do not begin the school year remotely, there is no way that literacy intervention can work. CDC guidelines recommend keeping students in one indoor space if possible and not mixing with students from other classrooms. That would make my usual method of providing services to students from different classrooms in Lawrence School's literacy room not feasible. Even if students were allowed to come to my teaching space, they would not be able to keep 6 feet apart. In addition, there is little to no airflow in the corner of the room I use for instruction. If I cannot see students in the literacy room, the other option would be to provide instruction within the classroom. However, with this approach, I could potentially be a spreader of the virus, since my work would take me in and out of 12 different classrooms. I would also be exposing myself to many more potential carriers of the virus. I echo comments made earlier by Jillian about how impossible it is to teach reading from 6 feet away wearing a mask. Teaching remotely, I can ensure that students hear me and see what my mouth looks like as I show them how to pronounce letter sounds. I will also be able to provide the small group intervention that they need. I want to close by addressing the negative comments made by some members of the Brookline community on the quality of instruction provided during the spring, instruction that has appropriately been labeled by my colleagues as crisis instruction. As a veteran of the Brookline teaching force, these disparaging comments have shaken me to the core and are deeply hurtful. Never before have I seen Brookline teachers and paraprofessionals work so hard to teach in a way in which none of us were trained. Many of us, myself included, have spent the summer taking courses in remote teaching so we can provide Brookline students with the education we know they deserve. Please do the right thing and vote for the plan presented by Casey and her team to begin the school year remotely and phase in-person learning when it is safe to do so. We will then have the time to prepare and put into practice high-quality instruction. Children will learn and we will all be safe.
Please wrap up.
Thank you, Terry. Adam is up next, and then Amy Shia.
Good evening. My name is Adam Freed. As I look forward to starting my 8th year as a math teacher at Brookline High School, I want to share with you what the hybrid portion of the proposed plan would look like in my classroom. The in-person students get their Chromebooks set up, and the remote students watch from home as I introduce the topic of the day. Launching into group work, students are working at virtual tables of 4, each featuring 2 students who are at OLS and 2 who are at home. These young mathematicians collaborate in a breakout room on Zoom while I pop between these rooms to observe the thinking taking place. When a group wants me to interact with them, they ping me in Zoom and I join their discussion. While 3 of us are physically present in the same space, we're each talking at our own individual screens. When the end of the block draws near, the students share out their findings while disinfecting their computers for the next group waiting to come in. In sharing this vision with others, the one question that continually arises is, if the interaction in class is happening via Zoom, why do any of the students need to physically be present in the classroom? For the sake of clarity, I want to mention what will not be happening in my classroom. Students will not be working shoulder to shoulder with their peers, leaning in to write on the dry erase tables, nor will they be handing papers back and forth to show each other their work. They also will not be puzzling out problems at any of the whiteboards that line the walls of my room. Now, what will be happening is that whenever a student coughs or sneezes, all eyes will snap to them. My 9th graders will spend as much time thinking about their safety as they spend pondering geometry. And so long as we are dealing with a deadly virus that we lack the tools to test for, I will be treating all students as COVID suspect. So again, I ask, if the interaction in class is happening via Zoom, why do any of the students need to be physically present in the classroom? The majority of the pedagogical arguments I've heard against remote learning center on the idea that remote learning will not allow for as strong an experience as traditional in-person learning. While I will readily concede this point, I will not allow the same arguments to be used in support of in-person learning this fall. It is neither fair nor fruitful to compare and contrast the impending realities of October of 2020 with the memories of October 2019. It is wholly unrealistic to expect in-person learning that begins just weeks from now to hold a candle to the in-person learning that took place last fall. Rather, it is much more likely that in-person learning based on a patchwork plan that still has just as many questions about it as it does answers will feel just as ineffective as the remote learning from this past spring. On the other hand, remote learning during this upcoming year will not follow the same game plan as the remote learning we wrapped up a few weeks ago. My colleagues throughout the district have dedicated their summers to building more impactful models of teaching students remotely. We are prepared to deliver a robust and engaging remote learning experience. The same cannot be said about in-person learning. Please trust us to do our jobs. So long as the letters TBD appear in proposals, please allow us to educate remotely. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Amy, you're up next, then Alejandra Munoz. Sorry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Xia. I'm a parent of a Brookline High School student. I wanted to thank the committee for this thoughtful plan, and I wanted to thank the school district and all these teachers and the staffs for your very hard work. We have seen that. Okay. We really appreciate it. And my son was with me when you presented the plan. And I wanted to assure you, at least in our family, we strongly support the remote plus plan. And we think it's a very thoughtful plan. One of the reasons we moved to Brookline and it is because of the school district. And we believe the school district is good because we have good resource and we have good experienced teachers. And so I think the committee, I would suggest the committee, will consider this plan to take into consideration of the health and safety of the teachers. Because only when we keep our teachers safe, we can keep our learning experience going on. And if there's anything happen with the teachers, then the education process got interrupted. Again, I want to say we really support the remote plan, and we think it's very thoughtful. But when it's going to the remote academy, I do have a few questions. We wanted to know the timeline of the district that we know at least before October or something, it will not switch to like cohort or hybrid teaching, so we can plan ahead. And also, if by any chance we go into the hybrid teaching, this model, we wanted to make sure that we can stay in the same cohort with the same student group, and we can learn with the same teachers. So that's the things I would suggest the committee to think about the details about how to switch or when to switch. And I wanted to say, in our family, we think we only wanted to switch to the hybrid learning when we are very confident about the safety of in-person learning. And at this moment, we are not confident about in-person learning. And we don't feel it's safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Alejandra, you're up, and then Faith Dantowitz.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Alejandra Munoz, and I'm a middle school science teacher at Lincoln. This year, I'll be entering my 5th year at Brookline Public Schools, and will also be serving as Lincoln's health and safety representative. As such, I look forward to making Lincoln and other schools as safe as possible for when the time does come that our schools are safe to return to. In this role, I would like to just bring to the attention of the school committee and our community some of the main health concerns for the reopening of Lincoln as a building, as they may also pertain to other buildings as well. Our first concern is ventilation. 3 years ago, I was at public comment for the school committee advocating on behalf of better ventilation at Lincoln, because our classrooms do get higher than 85 degrees Fahrenheit on many days during the school year, and we have many windows that still to this day do not open. As a result of our efforts from 3 years ago, there were some forced air solutions implemented on our 3rd floor classrooms. However, the second floor classroom and even the first floor continued to be a problem, and we still have many windows that have been identified as not being able to open or being able to be used by our custodial staff and are yet to be fixed. Our biggest ventilation concern is our bathrooms. We have 8 student bathrooms, 4 for each gender, and 1 gender neutral bathroom, and none of them have any windows. The bathroom is a space where students are often unsupervised, where masks could be possibly removed to wash faces and such, and there's no ventilation. This school year with 28 classes and only 27 general education classrooms, with our 6th and 7th grade social studies teacher teaching out of our multi-purpose room, which does not have any windows. Once we're ready to return, we will be needing to look for some additional spaces, also for our learning centers, which had been built out of extra hallway spaces, and most cannot accommodate the number of students on those teachers' workloads. So we would have to be looking at additional spaces, which would push us to look at some outdoor solutions. We are lucky at Lincoln to have outdoor space, and our staff has began to try to identify some of these spaces, but we do want to keep in mind things such as needing solutions for when students need to go to the bathroom that are not just porta potties, which are more enclosed spaces with no opportunities to wash our hands and to keep the proper sanitation in place, and to look at different options for suitable tents that we won't get rained on and have to slosh around in the mud with our students as well. So I wanted to make sure to bring those up as we gear up to work together to make our schools safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandra. Faith, you're up, and then Lydia Shire.
Hello. First, thank you for your service to our community. I appreciate you and your Herculean efforts during this exceptionally complex and to some scary time. My name is Faith Stantowitz, mom to 3 Brookline students, and along with Linda Monick, I am co-chair of the Brookline Special Education Parent Advisory Committee. CPACs are voluntary panels voted in and mandated by the state of Massachusetts to advise school committees and district administrators on matters relating to special education. Over the past 5 months, we have worked collaboratively with the administration, asking for an emphasis on mental health. We've strongly supported the needs for direct services, continue to advocate for no MCAS, began a weekly support group for parents, created website resources, supported families within our community to empower them to obtain remote services. We referred families for food and housing insecurities to resources, advocated for increased remote supports for struggling readers, greater utilization of paras, and served on remote learning task force, providing updates, resources, and communication to families. It's been a very busy, challenging time for everyone. As you make your decision, we ask you each to consider how educators will manage their students on IEPs and 504s. How will they access and include accommodations in a remote environment? How will they manage students with diverse learning disabilities, dyslexic students, students who are hard of hearing, students who refuse to participate, students who are visually impaired, students with mental health issues in a remote environment? And how will the BEU support educators and the need of all students so that all students have a fair and appropriate public education and an equitable educational experience? We offer public comment because, as Michelle Flynn states, without advocacy, vulnerable people cannot be heard or given credence. As you prepare to bring our most vulnerable children back into our buildings and talk about ways to meet the needs of all others, it's essential their voices be heard. We want to thank parents, guardians, and community members who have individually advocated for their children's needs. The many individual contributions to make our district a collectively stronger place tells us our organization is on the right track. We know as a community where service delivery during the spring was much less than adequate, but we know our extraordinary special educators tried hard under extremely new and incredibly challenging circumstances. Working together with administration and educators in the spirit of collaboration and support has led to greater service delivery efforts from May, and more so in the progress of our high-need students during ESY extended school year. We do believe this trend will continue during the upcoming school year. In light of the significant impact closure has and continues to have on our most vulnerable and those deemed high-need students, and all of our students on IEPs and 504s, we implore you to consider these students separately as you consider your decision as a school committee. Moving forward, we would like to let the school committee know we will be here making efforts to respectfully guide you and hold you and the administration accountable for providing the high quality education our students deserve. District leaders, we pledge to continue to work towards greater collaboration and mutual understanding. And we also promise to continue to speak until the needs of each and every child are met. To our outstanding parent community, we promise to continue to empower you. And most importantly, to our community of children and young adults, we promise to continue to fight for you and always for your inclusion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Faith. Lydia, you're up next, and then Ethan Treisman.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Lydia Schreier. I am a Brookline resident and parent of a rising 9th grader and a rising 11th grader. I'm also an adolescent medicine physician. As such, I've cared for many middle and high school students and their families during the pandemic. I am relieved that the reopening proposal includes Remote Plus to start, and I am confident that the teaching and learning experience will be different from the crisis mode we were all in the spring. I have some concerns about the details for plans for in-person instruction for most vulnerable students and the availability of the hybrid model to other students in phase 2. One of the most difficult things in this time of many challenges is the uncertainty and frequent need to change course. For kids, including my own, this is a great source of anxiety and can result in fear, depression, poor sleep and eating habits, disengagement from learning, impaired decision-making, and risk behavior, among other undesirable outcomes. I'm concerned that we in Brookline have a plan for reopening that is robust enough to withstand the inevitable unknowns and necessary responses. The only thing that is predictable about life is its unpredictability. There is no doubt that the in-person learning will be suspended at some point or even abandoned as suspected or confirmed cases find their way into the schools. What is not known is when. And then what? We need a system that will not fall apart easily. With each disruption and subsequent recovery time, there will be children who suffer from the loss of routine and cannot re-engage with learning. Children and families with higher stress, fewer supports, and fewer resources will be especially impacted. The phased-in plan implies that the pandemic and the school's response will only be improving over time, and it's just a matter of when all students will have the opportunity to return to school. Almost certainly, the trajectory will not be so linear, and we can expect that whatever plan is approved will be upended. How do we limit the impact of the disruptions? The plan needs to be able to move seamlessly, not only from remote instruction to in-person, but also from in-person back to remote. In the spring, my kids became unmoored without being able to count on consistent school routines and social connections. I want them back in school, in person, as soon as possible, but only within a plan that addresses the very real potential of being back and forth between remote and in-person instruction over the course of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Ethan, you're up next, and then Kayla Nicholson.
Hi, I want to thank everyone who's working on this. It's clearly been a heroic effort. I have 3 kids in the schools, and I'm comfortable sending them back to school. According to the public health experts in our community and the CDC and the WHO, we can go back to school safely. There's certainly, as we've heard, many teachers who are not comfortable and won't be comfortable going back to the classroom right off the bat. But I worry that there's a lot of stoking of fear going on, and the fearful are often the most vocal. Our teachers are fantastic and committed. I don't think there's any question about that. And I'm confident they can adapt quickly. If we must start remotely, to help them become comfortable going back in person, I wonder if it would be possible to have the teachers in the physical classrooms without students and having them teach from their classroom to the kids at home. That way they will have access to their materials, access to their colleagues, and hopefully we could also use outdoor space during the school day for teachers to become comfortable interacting with the kids for academic learning. Lots of us cannot work remotely and have not stopped working in person during the pandemic. We know that the first few days are scary, but we also know that when you see that the precautions work, you get used to it and it's not scary anymore. The precautions are definitely doable for both the teachers and the students. We can't let fear cloud our judgment of what we know works. The pandemic is our new reality and we must face it. There's no question that school won't be as fun and it will definitely be different, but we can't sit on the sidelines waiting for the world to go back to the way it was. because it's not going to. COVID is here to stay, and we have to start living with it in the ways that have been proven to keep us safe. Next, if we must start remotely, we have to have realistic benchmarks for a return to school, and it can't rely on a vaccine. A vaccine does not exist. If we get one, that's great, but it could be years away, and a return to school cannot be contingent on something that hypothetical. So I really think the keys are to helping the teachers feel comfortable, getting them back in the classrooms, easing them in by having them teach from the classrooms to the kids remotely. I want us to set reasonable and public benchmarks to get us back into the classroom. And I think it's really important that we not let fear drive our policy. We need to make rational, not emotion-based decisions that are in our children's best interests. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ethan. Kayla is next, and then Michelle Kalowski. Sorry.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Kayla.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Kayla Nicholson, and I'm a teacher here in Brookline. First of all, thank you to the school committee for listening to our voices and concerns. I too believe in a phased reopening model, but the safest way to do this is for 100% of students to start remote in the fall. Educators want to be in the buildings with our students. However, the Remote Plus plan still poses a risk that will result in educators, students, or their families getting sick and dying. Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley released a statement on Friday in agreement with a full remote learning model. Congresswoman Pressley states, quote, "Schools throughout the Commonwealth are not equipped with the resources, equipment, classroom facilities, and staff necessary to safely reopen in-person courses. I unfortunately do not think Brookline is prepared to staff a safe and effective Remote Plus model at this time, even for just a small number of students. For example, Brookline has not ensured necessary improvements and safety procedures for students in bathrooms and hallways, ventilation, nor for thoroughly cleaning and sanitizing buildings. Things are not safe for any students to be in person, not even a small group. Fully remote learning will be much more effective this time around as well. Curriculum coordinators and educational technology specialists are running over 40 summer PDs for teachers about how to effectively teach remotely, connect with students remotely, and meet social emotional needs remotely. I have personally signed up for 20 hours of remote learning PDs, and I'm not the only one. Thank you very much for listening and considering these points.
Thank you, Kayla. Michelle, you're up next, then Andrew Guttle.
Good afternoon, it's Michelle Kalowski. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you to the school committee and staff for all of the hard work that you've done, as well as all of the hard work that I know that Brookline teachers have done as well. I echo the sentiments of, I think, four parents who have spoken before me, Ethan, Joshua, Marina, and Thomas. I'm the parent of 2 elementary school students at the Lawrence Elementary School. And I'm here today because I had originally supported a hybrid model. And while I'm still absorbing the Remote Plus model, I don't think that it's a model that helps supports our youngest students. In the description of the Remote Plus model, I heard a lot about remote, but I didn't hear much about plus. I didn't hear much about the timeline to getting back in person, and I didn't hear any description of the proposed outdoor learning that could be part of that as a solution. I think that it is vitally important for our youngest students to have in-person interactions. What I saw last spring was children who really struggled emotionally and academically, in part just because of, not necessarily even because of the material that was presented. It was just a lack of engagement that I saw. Even when the material was great, it is very difficult for young children to engage in it if they don't have a parent or a teacher or a person with them who can help guide them through the process. I just don't think that it is realistic to expect young elementary school students to get on a computer and plug their way through the day, having
synchronous teaching helps, but as one of the parents previously said, if you have a half-hour period of time where the child is supposed to work independently while sitting by themselves, I just don't think that that is realistic to get through every day. Children sitting in desks by themselves, no other children or adults around. I don't think it works for our youngest students, and I encourage the committee to think creatively about ways in which our students can safely interact with their teachers and peers, whether it's outside, whether it's making the investment in purchasing whatever equipment is required to make students and staff safe in their buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Andrew, you are up, and then Chris Lofnan.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Andrew. Go ahead.
My name is Andy Gattell. My son is a student at Brookline High School. First, I'd like to thank the Department of Public Health and the school administrators, the faculty, the expert advisory panels for the work that was shared today. Remote Plus is really very encouraging. School committee members, I would like to speak to the health and safety of classrooms and school buildings. Article after article in newspapers and journals talks about the benefits that there are returning to school, quote, assuming the buildings can be made safe and healthy spaces. Or as Dr. Fauci, who was referenced a couple times today, said this past week, paramount is safety, the health and welfare of children, teachers, school personnel, and their families. My concern is around air quality, and I think that is foundational before we can open up the buildings. It's essential that each and every learning space, bathroom, hallway, every place where students and faculty will be that is intended to be utilized during the hybrid model must meet safe air quality guidelines established by nonpartisan professional organizations. It would be reckless and negligent to send students, teachers, and staff back into the buildings that are not compliant with what is known to be best practice. If we can't meet the standards for safe air quality, then starting the year remotely until a safe and healthy building environment can be established and maintained is a responsible choice. The American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, Air Conditioning and Engineers advises the use of MERV level 13 filters for HVAC systems in each and every learning space. Have MERV 13 filters been placed in the ventilation systems of all the classrooms? What about rooms without dedicated ventilation units? Let's remember, we can't count on the use of outdoor tents throughout the year. Tent spaces can't really be included in this count if the decision to return to school looks ahead more than a number of weeks. Similarly, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, which is an official participant in OSHA, advises an air exchange rate of 6 to 20 complete air exchanges per hour for classrooms. Is this rate of air exchange occurring in all the classrooms? As with tents, open windows cannot realistically be included as part of the year-long equation. The decision to return students, teachers, and staff to the buildings may be the most serious decision that each member of the school committee will ever make. It may indeed be a life and death decision for someone in the PSB community. Since February 2020, we in the United States have underestimated this virus again and again. Tragically, many continue to do so. This virus will not accommodate the wants and the desires of our economy, of our calendars, or of our political views. Absent specific information for all the learning spaces regarding safe air quality through proper filtration and air exchange, you must support the recommendation to start with Remote Plus. Thank you very much for your time and your consideration.
Thank you, Andy. Chris, you're up next, and Vitor Seraphim after that.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Chris. Go ahead.
Excellent. My speakers went out, but I think you can still hear me, then I'll go. So my name is Chris Loughnane. I'm the father of a rising 6th grader and 1st grader at Lawrence School. I wrote a couple sentences based on the previous plan that had been shared, and I'd still like to put those out and then comment on some of the things I've seen today. So what I had written was that I'd like to say that I'm broadly pleased with the priorities underpinning the plans set forth, specifically the focus on getting younger children into the classroom and the level of detailed attention paid to the precautions. I myself had come to the same conclusion, for what it's worth, heavily influenced by an economist report on the topic and a study from South Korea showing kids less than 10 were significantly less likely to transmit than those older than 10. I also wanted to applaud administrators for proposing a hybrid solution. I think it's really easy for leaders to focus primarily on caution because an increase in COVID cases is higher visibility than the degradation of young children's minds. All that said, we are still learning about the disease, and the only correct way to move forward is to lean on learnings as they come and adjust our risk balances. So that's what I had written. Clearly, we're a little bit less well aligned at this point, but I've noticed some interesting things on this call. Milestones for reopening are clearly a necessary element. Without them, any plan is incomplete, and I can't determine whether I agree with it or not. The milestone should or even must be included before anything is voted on. I've noticed several commenters earlier leaning heavily on emotionally infused language. While I understand the temptation, I think the correct approach is to take a clear-eyed look at the facts and then balance the risks appropriately. Similarly, kudos to the commenters who reference sources when they're appealing to science and facts. It's the only way we can have a meaningful conversation. I've also noticed that much of the vocal concern of parents seems to be coming from K2 parents, which I think in and of itself is telling. I like the principle of remaining flexible with a plan that allows continuity in the face of change, because as some other people have said, certainly there will be change over the coming months. And then last, I'd like to end with a question that I'd like to have answered at some point is, how do you intend to measure the performance of this approach? I have no doubt that it is drafted with the best intentions and also that it will be better than the spring, but there is still the possibility that it doesn't meet our expectations, which would affect the risk balance. What then? What does that look like? How are we measuring that? I would like to know. And that's all. Thank you,
Chris. Appreciate it. Heather Pritchard, you are our last speaker. Are you there?
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Heather. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Heather Pritchard, and I'm a 6th and 7th grade social studies teacher at Driscoll. Thank you so much for your service to the community. We are not prepared to implement a hybrid model of learning. Last week, you yourselves were easily able to poke hole after hole in the district's plan for hybrid learning. I teach my students that they should take risks, but only those that are calculated, not reckless. Just yesterday, I talked to a rising 6th grade student who said, I would never commit to a plan if I didn't know what was needed to carry it out. To district administration, thank you for humbly recognizing we do not have what we need to safely carry out a hybrid approach to learning. Even if we could pull off the logistics, there is another question, which Susan Wolf-Ditkoff raised last week. What is the value of in-person learning the way we are going to have to do in-person learning? Under current circumstances, in-person learning offers less value when compared to the possibilities of remote learning. Students in my classroom would sit at individual desks spaced 6 feet apart. They would be facing forward, unable to see each other's faces. I would be the sole focus of the classroom. This is a classroom of the 1950s, not 2020. In my classroom, students normally solve real-life problems through collaborative group work. They discover the complexities of the world and work through disagreement in class discussions. And I meet one-on-one with students to answer questions and offer feedback. All of these things would be impossible in a socially distant classroom with safety protocols in place. They, however, are not impossible in a remote setting. Each day that passes without a vote from the school committee is lost time. Tomorrow, I will spend my day in curriculum planning meetings with other social studies teachers across the district. How are we to plan when we do not know exactly what we are planning for? Please vote tonight for a fully remote start to the school year for all educators and students. That way teachers can do our part, planning the most efficacious remote learning model possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I believe that is our last speaker. So thank you to everyone who came to speak. We appreciate it. We really do listen, as you can tell. And also thank you to everybody who has sent us hundreds of emails, but with your passions and your thoughts and your data, we do appreciate it. You can continue to send them. We will continue to read them. And we will have one more public comment before we vote, and that will be on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. So we are now ready for the committee to ask the questions and deliberate. And before we start, Jim, did you have anything you want to say? I don't want to put you on the spot. I just didn't know if you wanted to kick it off in any way.
No, that's okay. Being on the spot is where I belong. I just want to say that the public comment has been really helpful and sometimes difficult to listen to, because when there isn't a clear answer, we want clear answers. We want to be able to move in a direction that unifies all of us. But as you said in the very beginning, Suzanne, this is people will come at it from different places, and I do think we should. Some of the questions outstanding. I think we should actually address some of those questions, like in-person meeting teachers and some of the ideas that have been floated around that. And we have to respond to the questions that were raised tonight to the best of our ability, and keeping the advice that we get coming. And it's also interesting to know, just as an aside, that the commission has scheduled another meeting tomorrow because all districts across the state are feeling similar kinds of pressure. But specifically around the comments coming from the Brookline community, I can't read all my email because it piles up. But as I'm reading it, I'm heartened by what I hear. It's heartfelt. It's really, I think, sincere. There are no easy answers. People acknowledge that there are no easy answers, and that we're living in a time of uncertainty that is having its impact on all of us. But I do think that the tone of the comments and the ability to listen to the comments and to react where it makes sense and where we think it's logical and not, and I agree that we should not be responding just to please one group or another or whatever, but we should be responding in a way that, as we do our own planning, that makes sense both in the short term, because we have to start school, but with an eye for the long term, and doing so in a way that we feel is justified by the conditions on the ground and what we're dealing with in the school, which I hope we get to, particularly the ventilation. So let's begin.
Okay, so we will go through each person, and give you each a chance to speak. And I'll do as we've done before, which is I'll call on one person at a time, and I will get to everybody at least once, and then we can start on a second round. So you can ask a number of questions in your first round if you want. That way I make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak, so we can get started. But you can certainly ask questions of anybody that's here on the panel, so it'll be good. So who would like to go first? There's some comments, questions. Mariah.
Can you hear me? Oh, maybe.
Yes.
Hold on one. Can you hear me better now?
Much better.
Okay.
Much better. Thank you.
Wrong. Yeah, sorry about that. So first off, I want to thank, I think we got 500 emails this weekend. I don't even know. It was just a wild number of emails. And it was really helpful to hear all the strongly held opinions. As you said, Suzanne, one thing that struck me as I was reading them was the frequent refrain from both sides was that the other side doesn't represent the voice of the people, and that there's a lot more people who agree with the person writing the email. And if they would just write to us, there's hundreds of emails with the same theme. And it just speaks to how passionately people feel, and I appreciate that. And families are going to be disappointed. Lots of families are going to be disappointed, and everyone's disappointed. This is not what anyone wants, right? Like nobody's like, yes, this is how I wanted school to look like. But I think that it's really important to recognize that this approach can also be, in my opinion, congruent with what the science says, because the science right now is saying that the public health experts are saying that you need to have control strategies, I think is the term that Joe Allen uses in his report. that those need to be in place. And unfortunately, right now in our buildings, they're not in place. And so what I'm hoping is that we are going to, I'm requesting that for Wednesday, if this is possible, and some speakers, some of the speakers from the public alluded to this, that we really have a work plan on Wednesday presented to us that kind of maps out a realistic timeline for how, for example, like a milestone for, is it like, what is the date by which we could hopefully bring K students, all the kindergarten students back to school? Is it a week? Does it take 2 weeks? When is the date by which we hope to get first grade back? What is the date, or, K through 2 back, however you want to present this. But I think part of the fear that we all feel, and I'll talk about that, just to sort of my opinions about that in a second, is that it's going to be a whole year of this. And it's just this unknown, right? Everything stretches out into the forever. And so if we can sort of be concrete about where the building issues, which is where the science lies, where the building issues will be reined in, and we'll either have HEPA filters in place or whatever we need to do, that'll be, I think, very reassuring to people. Because if, our goal is, and I'm making this up, so nobody quote this at all, but if our goal is to bring kindergartners back within a week or two, then that's a very different vision than a full year of remote learning for kindergartners. And people, I think that might help some people, especially for the families, I'll say like mine and so many families we heard from, parents, particularly working parents, working parents of small children, parents who have children who have who need significant support for either they're on an IEP or whatever else is going on, right? There's so many things that many students who don't access this well. And so having sort of a sense of what the horizon is that we're aiming for, and knowing that community spread might hold us back. But if we can stay at close to our levels of community spread, and we can do this ventilation, then we can make these things happen to make our buildings safe. So Suzanne, I have a question. I have about 50, I don't have a question. This is a meta question. I have about 15 questions that the community asked with their specific questions that people wanted to know the answer of, parents who posted these on Facebook, and I collated them and tried to organize them to hopefully provide information back to the community. And I would love to actually be able to ask them tonight on behalf of the hundreds of parents who are asking these questions, so that they can hear the answers. So can I ask those questions now, or when is the right time to ask those questions?
Somebody can help me with this. So if you have 15, perhaps.
Well, I just have a thought here. If the questions are going to require that we do a little research to get the answer, then I think it's probably best to submit the questions and we'll get the answers, and then we can get those back in an efficient way, so that it will be more satisfying than to hear, well, we have to research that. So I don't know what the questions are. Some are
quick. Some are quick, and we can put pins in the one. If you say like hold that one, then we could put a pin in it and say.
I would say use your judgment on it. If you think it's quick and they will have it, and then let's shoot through it. And if you're okay with putting a pin in, then we'll do that too.
Okay.
Aaron, you ready? Matt, you ready?
Well, I can submit them to you in writing afterwards too, but I think it's nice if the public can hear their question be asked and hear it potentially answered in real time. Right. Then that's awesome, right? Okay, right, so first question is, and some of these questions people actually texted to me during the meeting so far. So one of them is, when will the middle school schedule be presented? Because there was a K through 5 schedule presented and a 9 through 12 schedule presented.
Unless you know, Aaron, we have to put a pin in it.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if Michelle, we presented a K to 8 sample last time, but I'll let Michelle maybe speak to that.
You're muted, Michelle.
Yes, I keep hitting the wrong button. So I would just say put a pin in it so we could give something that was more accurate. The K to 5 was very high level intentionally, just to give a sense of what would happen during the school day.
Okay. The next question is, in the hybrid model that Anthony described, which I think was the same as what we saw last week, does that still rely on the model that Hal described, which is where a teacher would be providing simultaneous in-person and remote, or is that not the case anymore?
I don't think that's the case anymore.
Okay. then can you explain how classes will, and this can be a big picture answer, but how classes will transition? So for example, if you're in K through 5, how does your world language teacher come in? Do those kids need to switch classes, like to get to the world language teacher? Or does the world language teacher join the Zoom and the primary teacher goes away? And then the same thing at the high school level is how are they going to be clicking through a million Zooms, or in let's say in the middle school level, will they be clicking through a million Zooms? What does that transition between classes in the remote format look like?
I think that's probably
who's answering that?
I was going to say that's probably a question better answered by maybe Scott Moore, who's our ed tech specialist. Unless Michelle, what he would say, but if not, we can get you that response.
No, okay. I think he needs to work with the scheduling people to have that be seamless.
Okay, so we'll put a pin in that one. How is the role between parent as the facilitator and teacher envisioned during remote? You mentioned something like independent learning means that a parent doesn't need to be involved, but what does that mean for a first grader joining a Zoom?
Okay, so this is a case that's a sort of evolving, because a lot of this is dependent upon other factors as we come together. But essentially, the way I am looking at it is that there will be other people in the school that will be connected to the grades and to the teachers, who will have responsibilities for being connected to parents and to students on a regular basis. And by a regular basis, I do mean multiple times during the week, that will check in on the kinds of things of connectivity, engagement, how that student is doing, and being much more connected directly with them. Now, the actual details of that really have to be discussed and worked out. And once we have a full plan going forward, I would be looking at how many paras we're going to need to have in order to assist in that communication piece. That communication piece, I think, is in many ways is the linchpin to a lot of the success here, and the distance, the instructional piece that's happening. The whole other piece about being in person, which you're going to talk about in a minute, and I'll let you talk about it.
Next question is, and what is the approximate daily synchronous learning in remote, and does it vary by elementary, middle, high school levels?
I don't have the answer to that. That's much more detailed than we can answer right now.
Okay, put a pin in it. Can you elaborate the types of envisioned activities for the envisioned outdoor activities?
Well, I can tell you that
for the remote plus, just to be clear.
The remote plus, and I think it's a plus personally. But I'll give you a couple of ideas. So long as I think, Mariah, you said that you're going to say some things. Don't quote me and don't hold me to it. Didn't you say that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm going to put this in the category of ideas. So the plus, first of all, I have received the communication from physical education staff that basically said that that join in a thought partner, wants to come in and join as a thought partner with me. Of course, it would be with the team, so that there'll be a brainstorming of outside physical education, how that can happen. The person was bubbling over with ideas of how that physical education may work. I also spoke to, this is in the realm of ideas now, where we have remote learning going on, assuming that we can handle whatever transportation issues that would be in front of us. But you could, for example, let's just say you have rising ninth graders. They left school in March 13th and haven't been in the brick and mortar building for months. And now we're going to start school and they're going to be remote. We could arrange for half of that grade to come to school, and they could be. And by the way, this is not solely my idea. As many of you are going to remember that when I went to the Joint Labor Management Council meeting, this is actually the teacher's idea. I'm just expanding on it a little bit. The teacher's idea was to have invite a class in, or invite students in, have them be in a large area, a field of the playground, under the tent, where teachers could connect with their students, socially distanced, and they could have conversation. I expanded that a little bit and thought, well, what if we took half the grade and brought them in so there'd be fewer kids, just half the 9th grade in the building? And if there are, how many kids in a grade? Approximately 250 in a grade, 1,000 kids at the high school? I'm not really certain. But let's say there are 1,000. So let's say there's, you could have the 125 students coming in, and the teachers could be there. Their classes would be taught by a substitute, and that's where we would have that happen. It happens now anyway. Taught by a substitute, teachers, the students would come in. The teachers could engage those students in very small groups, engage those students both in the building in appropriate spaces and outside. And being outside, students would be socially distanced. They'd be wearing their masks for sure. And then they would be having conversations. The teachers had that idea. The teachers thought, we want to meet our students in person so they can see us. They wanted to do that. I think if we have this remote plus, the building is empty, so you could bring the students in. They could spend time in the building as well as out of the building. 9th graders haven't had the orientation. In very small groups, they could be set up to tour the building and then go outside. I say that meet their teachers, play some music, feed them, and have an enjoyable time being together. A couple of days later, you could flip it, bring the other half of the 9th grade in, and you could actually play that out through the whole school system. You could take, pick a grade, and take half that grade in and have very specific issues that you want to do with them. Juniors have very specific issues around their education, around testing, around understanding what's going to be happening as I prepare to think about, as a junior, I'm beginning to think about post-secondary. What am I going to do? You bring half the grade in. You could energize or involve the counseling staff, and teachers would meet their students. Counseling staff would have some conversation with them, and the in-person piece of it could be very focused on what's happening with students in terms of their own educations and how they're thinking about that. It doesn't necessarily have to just be sort of a specific, that kind of a learning experience. Of course, then you have the other stuff, phys ed, art, music outside. The ideas are just limited to somebody's imagination once you do that. But so that's how I'm looking at the retirement plus. Listen to me, as remote plus. It shows you where I've been. I'll tell you.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in, Mariah. I'm going to give you one more question now. We'll come back to you in a second round, but I want to give everybody a chance to.
Thank you, Suzanne.
For the most vulnerable students, how will they have an inclusionary experience if they're the only ones in person?
Yeah, this is a Casey question. She's thought a lot about this, so put a pin in that one, please.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back, Mariah. Jennifer, I think you had your hand up.
Hi, I really want to thank everyone for all of their really hard work. It's a lot of really great information. You can really see sort of a lot of the thinking here. I am supportive of a remote model, and I really like the idea of students and teachers being able to connect in person, particularly outdoors. We're getting a lot of information, and I think that we know that we don't have the protocols in place, or I feel like I know that we don't have the safety protocols in place for in-person learning in all of our rooms and in all of our schools at this time. And I'm glad to see that we have some ideas about how we're going to make our spaces as minimal risk as possible. We are getting a lot of science and information that's changing. And I bring this up just because we are getting so much information and things are changing. Like, for example, on Friday, there was an article from the CDC, and they were studying a particular case that isn't particularly similar to us because we're talking about taking more precautions, for example, the use of masks. But they do say, and I quote, "This investigation adds to the body of evidence demonstrating that children of all ages are susceptible to SARS-CoV-2 infection, and contrary to earlier reports, might play an important role in transmission." And so I think that our information is changing and what we're getting. And so I think we just need to keep that in mind. I've heard science used on all sides, sort of, we're getting lots and lots of feedback. And so we need to sort of keep that in mind. And I think that it feels like a good place for me that we understand that we don't have what we need in place to do full in-person, or even for me, any sort of hybrid model. I want to just bring up a question about eye protection, which has been brought up in past public comment, and sort of see where we are on that. It really, I mean, we're hearing that that is important, particularly for teachers, but possibly also for students, because there's evidence that you can get COVID through the eyes now. And so, I just want to sort of that brings a really particular vision for me about what that's like to be a student in a class with a teacher has goggles or a face mask and a face shield. I don't know. So I just want to know sort of where we're thinking about eye protection and whether or not that's going to be part of our plan. And related to that is a question about which kind of mask we would be requiring. There's a recent study that talks about which masks are more effective. And so I would urge us to be specific in what we think are acceptable forms of masks. So I guess those are my two questions. The first was more of a comment. Eye protection masks. And I am very much interested in having a conversation, and I will leave it at the chair's discretion as to when that is, but it is very important to me, about the DESE and DPH benchmarks for how they think, what are the set of circumstances in which we would close specific rooms in schools, because I don't think that I'm much in line with the thinking. I feel like actually I'm not. They're pretty specific in needing lots of cohorts of COVID positive cases before we can even consider it. And in particular, I'm very interested in the definition of close contacts that DESE puts out. I find it extremely problematic, and in that I think the public really parents need to be educated about what the DESE guidelines are. For example, I think parents would probably find it surprising that if there is and I'm not saying this is a Brookline thing, I'm saying this is a DESE thing, that if a child in a class tests positive and the kids in the class are theoretically 6 feet apart and wearing masks, those students in that class would not be considered close contacts. That's very problematic. I think our families are going to expect that if a student in that class tests positive, that they would know. And I'm not saying that we wouldn't inform them. I'm just saying that this is a conversation we need to have when we talk about pivoting to a decision point between hybrid and a remote academy, that I really think that families, I think I would expect as a parent, and I think lots of families would, and we saw some evidence of this when we were starting to have cases come up in our schools in the spring, and families being upset about whether or not they were notified. And so I think we should be really clear for ourselves about what those parameters are. So I think two really big things for me and being comfortable with any sort of hybrid conversation are thinking about what our benchmarks are for closure in comparison to DESE benchmarks, because their standards for me are pretty high for closing rooms and schools, much let alone the district. And like I said, our definition of what close contacts are, that's a really big concern for me, really big. And I think whatever it is that we decide or is decided, families need to understand so that we can be proactive, so that there will not be confusion on the other end about when they can expect to be notified when their students are in a building.
Okay.
Thank you.
Barbara.
Thank you. That was a very helpful presentation today. I like the way in which we are moving. And I have a couple of questions and thoughts about the online teaching. We talked about teaching to the whole class, and then kids would break up into small rooms, which you can do easily on Zoom. But I wonder, particularly with kids who are, well, even with 5th or 6th graders, but with younger kids, I wonder how easily this will be supervised, because you have the one teacher and you have kids broken up maybe in groups of 6 or whatever. And I know we could have paras also working, but I'm wondering if you've thought at all about asking for volunteers. There are a lot of retired Brookline teachers who might be perfectly willing to work with a teacher who is doing remote work and do something that would help guiding, supervising, etc. This small group work that's happening in the breakout rooms. I think if you expect the teacher to go into all of those, he or she is not going to have enough time to really cover that. I mean, when you're in the classroom, you can look around and see who is working and where you need to move. You can't do that online. So you could put kids in that breakout room and you have no idea what's going on. So I would think that recruiting some volunteers from the retired teachers and Brookline staff, maybe people, ones that teachers know who could ask them to come in, just as a volunteer. We used to have a very sizable volunteer program in Brookline, which I don't think we have anymore. But the teachers who are retired may be more familiar with it. I had a couple of other questions. And one, again, is how do we know? I know you have to have the contract settled before you can ask. But how do we know that we are going to have enough people to go back to work with the SPED students? People are not work. I'm not talking about online now. I'm talking in school. Mm-hmm. I worry a little bit about the fact that I wouldn't want us to be in the position of forcing people to go back if they're not comfortable with it. I think they need to be comfortable with going back with all of the proper precautions taken, and maybe some COVID testing if we can do it. I was thinking about the things that BU is doing for people coming back, and they're doing regular routine tests on them. And what I actually was thinking about was the onslaught of BU students in some of our neighborhoods when they come back, and whether they will follow the safety regulations as they're walking around and riding their bikes that we would like them to do. But I'm wondering if we can do some COVID testing as people return. And I wonder if we can find out about teachers who might be willing to come back, because in the same way that some parents want their children back in school, other parents don't. And I'm sure the same thing is true in the teaching, in our cohort of teachers. Some of them may be willing to come back because they're not so worried about it. Others may not. And again, that would be a union issue. Finally, there were questions about teaching from the classroom. If I, as a teacher, wanted to go into school and teach online from my classroom, because all of my books are there, all of my stuff is there, I have maybe a spouse working at home, there might be little kids there who are being watched by their grandparents. I don't know what people have various situations. Would we be able to let people go into their classrooms to do remote teaching? I think that's all questions that I had.
Okay. I'm not sure I can answer all of those definitively, but in terms of teachers coming back, I think once a vote is taken and there's certainty of what the plan is, then teachers are going to make their decisions based on that. And so it's not hypothetical, they're going to make their decisions. We are seeing some movement in that area now. Hopefully, I think we're looking at ventilation issues that are in the building. And other than that, Matt and I talk together all the time. I think that the classrooms I think teachers would be able to access their classroom we would have to make certain that we have our safety pieces that are in place because we're working on ventilation. So that one we could certainly make the building available. It seems, but we'd have to see how that would actually play out. Having a cadre of volunteers come in and work with teachers. I think you alluded to it a little bit, Barbara, when you said teachers could ask their former colleagues who may be retired to come in. I think there's a trust. You have to know somebody who you're co-teaching with, and as a volunteer, as you're going through the process of learning it yourself, I think it's a great idea, but I cannot sit here and say we're going to put a call out to all the volunteers. Teachers are going to have to, I as a teacher, having a volunteer come in working with me is going to have to be, that's a relationship thing that has to develop. The concept clearly feels like you're expanding your workforce there. And so the concept is a terrific concept. Actually making it happen is going to be depend on relationships as well. So there again, that's a definite maybe is what I would say.
Can I also just come back to Jennifer's questions to all of the information or all of the questions that you asked around masks and eye protection are conversations that we're having with Dr. Jett, with our Tricia Laham and our nurses, as well as experts on panel 4. And though that information does have to be in our final plan that we submit to DESE on the 14th. So all of that will be in there, but I also hear you on there being a difference between DESE benchmarks and what we might provide. And so having that conversation, I've written down as kind of a next step too.
Yeah.
Who else would like to speak? Sure, David.
So I've got 2 areas of questions. The first would be around the 300 students cap for most vulnerable. I'm wondering whether that fully accounts for the different categories that fall under the definition for most vulnerable, because there were a lot of different groupings and cohorts that were mentioned in that context. Students who are on IEPs, students with physical disabilities, English language learners, also those who are economically disadvantaged.
Yeah.
My guess is that number of all those groups combined far exceeds 300. So where did the 300 number come from? And then a related question to that, is the intention to have that group of 300 in one particular school building or spread across multiple buildings?
Okay, well, first off, and then Aaron, you can fill in. That number came from Casey today was making calls to program directors around that because there's overlap. There's overlap in those different categories. And as she was adding the numbers up, she was coming to around 300. Aaron, you were in the room with us when she was going through that. So the number is an estimate. It is an estimate. But we had some level of confidence that number was around the right number. It may vary one way or another. But Aaron, you can fill in on that. Let me just say this last piece. In terms of being in the same building or the same room, we had a discussion about we need to connect back with Matt. We need to strategically select the areas so that we know the ventilation is where it needs to be. So it'll be determined by where the ventilation and what we think meets our standard, and then we will make the assignments. Of course, there's lots connected to that, keeping kids together and all of that, but that's the safety piece is what we're looking at. Aaron.
Yeah, so Dr. Marine is right, and that is the estimate that Casey came up with along with conversations she had with program directors from the EL department and her special ed directors, some folks from Steps to Success and others today and in previous weeks. And so while that is an estimate, that I don't think it's a cap necessarily, it's the number that we came up with for the presentation today. And we can certainly look into whether or not that needs to be expanded when we're collaborating with families and principals and teachers and determining who those students are.
Yeah.
And then my next question relates to outdoor space. It's somewhat similar to a question asked by Mariah. I am concerned that I don't see much in the way of tangible planning for what outdoor learning will look like. I greatly appreciate the vision you outlined, Dr. Marini, about how we could utilize outdoor space. But I think that our community really wants to see exactly what it's going to look like across all grade levels, and that it would be firmly scheduled, because routine is very important. I'm glad to see that we're moving in a more detailed direction when it comes to K through 5 for the remote learning piece, but I'd like to see something similar for outdoor learning, because overall I'm concerned somewhat about this phased-in approach, and that it works backwards if we look at it from a perspective of weather and when we can expect a second spike. I really want us to be taking advantage of the good weather, relatively speaking, that we have right now, and also just the reality that when children are starting a new school year, they want to know who their peers are, they want to know who their teachers are. So I think we really want to try to schedule those opportunities in a fixed, regular cycle and beginning early on. And I would try to make that as much as possible in outdoor space, because I am very concerned about lack of proper ventilation in many of our buildings and many of our classrooms. And by no means would I ever want anyone to be in an unsafe indoor space. But it appears that most of the scientific community agrees that outdoors with proper social distancing is relatively safe. So I do want to make sure that that becomes a core component of the plan that we ultimately end up voting on.
Okay.
Okay, who's next? Who else would like to speak? Helen?
I guess I'm having some difficulties here in the sense that I'm hearing from the public health experts. I've listened to a number of the public health advisory committee, and all the I think we have more doctors per square foot in Brookline than, I think, even more than Newton, actually. And ours are professors, but nonetheless, it just, I'm really, and then I think about my own knowledge of education, and especially education for early childhood kids, including kindergarten and first grade, and probably second. And I know we're working, and Matt and Charlie are working full speed ahead to try and get all our buildings up to speed. But it seems to me, the use of the outside, like David was talking about, especially for kindergarten, especially for ninth graders who are transitioning into new schools, new routines, new everything, is a critical piece. And we could give up the opportunity of, the good weather by waiting until, we have everything perfect. So sometimes perfect is the enemy of the good. Yeah. And I think we need, it's all of this is, we're trying to do the best we can, and I get that. And I appreciate you trying to pivot on the plan, though I think I would have stayed with it and tried to really make it work first. And I think we can get there. I think there's goodwill on the part of the town, certainly the Parks and Rec to work with us. And I guess my question has to do with, so when can we get there? When will those milestones? I mean, I think a month is a long time, and we can do things. And I don't think that just because we plan to have, some, let's say, kindergartners come in, in the first week or so and start with one class and then move to including the first graders. Mm-hmm. We could find ways to make that work. Mm-hmm. The other piece that I'm also quite concerned about is the developmentally appropriate manner of dealing with kindergarten.
in the same manner as the rest of 1 through 8. I think our kindergarten teachers, they told us last year very clearly that, you know, that's not the way they do education. Yeah. And that is not appropriate for kindergartners. So I would hope that there would be a conversation with that group. I think they're very amenable to talking to the administration about how they would creatively see kindergarten working in an in-person situation or in a remote, both. Because I think it is true, at some point we may need to go all remote, and we need to be prepared for that. So when teachers sometimes talk about, well, we need to prepare for remote, yes, we need to prepare for remote, because we may not start out that way, or we may start out that way, or we may end up at some point there for some period of time. So it's not like, do I learn about remote? We have to do remote. But how we do it and when we do it, to me, is a question.
Good points. I made note of that. Thank you.
Just one comment in response, and I don't know if Matt's still on, and he could probably speak to this a little bit more in terms of timing, but you know, the reason that we created the plan the way that we did, or presented it the way that we did, in terms of having no dates on there, is because we really need a decent amount of time, maybe, again, Matt could speak to this, to figure out what that timeline would be. And we're not saying that, you know, kindergarten through 2nd grade, or really kindergarten through 12th grade, will never, you know, go back into the buildings. We're saying that we need to make those buildings and those classrooms safe before they do so. And we want to gradually enter them in. And I think maybe Mariah mentioned this, like it might be a week, it might be 2 weeks, but we just need a little bit more time to gather that info. I think I'm hearing Matt.
I am here. I took myself off mute, and I'm at home, so pardon the background noise. My kids are wondering why I've been, you know, on a meeting this long. But so in regards to the buildings, you know, for starters, I'd like to say, like, they are safe. They have been meeting standards. We're just trying to enhance the air quality and increase the air change rate as one of the ways that we mitigate the risk. Masks that we will provide if students forget them will be the multifold surgical masks. Like the neck gaiter I'm wearing, I believe is not as recommended, because it's not necessarily multi-layered unless you do that. So that's a question that we can ask Dr. Jett, as well as I've already emailed them about how are we going to respond to families. Good job, defense. Okay. Quiet. That's my puppy. He tries to sound like a big dog. How we would communicate with families and what the standard is should somebody contract COVID in the class, and then how do we communicate with the rest of those families? Upgrading the systems, we're in the process of doing that so that we can have better airflow as well as better filtration in the classrooms to mitigate the risk of spreading the disease, along with some more furniture and procuring tents, whether we buy them or rent them, and where we're going to put those up, and coordinating that with the Parks Department and Erin Galentine, which has been extremely amenable and helpful, as well as Town Hall and all the spaces we identified where potentially we could set up some outdoor classrooms. And the principals are working on how they would structure that into the day, and how that would look. So we're in many ways we're sort of redesigning how we've done things differently, and for the first time, and trying to check off as many things as we can to enhance safety features and mitigate risk and mitigate the opportunity to contract the virus. It's just something that takes a little bit of time to get there and to answer all the questions, because there have been a lot of good questions. And speaking just for myself, but probably many other people, when we do reopen, we really want to be able to remain open. We want to do this well and do it right so that it can be sustainable if it needs to be for a long period of time.
Who else would like to speak? Andy or Susan or Sharon?
I'm sure. I just have like a general comment about, so what the heck do we do now for our families? So when last week's hybrid plan was presented, right, there was a lot of discussion about the staffing problem that this would present in our buildings and how we would need to hire all these new educators to carry out the plan and replace teachers who couldn't work in person. So what this week's plan does is to push that staffing problem out into the community, right? It's now in thousands of homes where parents are going to have to support their children's all remote learning without the time or tools to do so. So I think we should treat this staffing problem as a crisis. It's fully on a par with the staffing problem we would have had with in-person learning under social distancing. So, and just in general, I hope that we're prepared to devote the kind of resources to supporting parents in their homes that we would have devoted to hiring teachers for in-person learning. And we should be thinking about that level of commitment to supporting the families who are going to be devastated by this, and really devote some time to figuring out, like, what can we do for them, especially the families in harsh economic circumstances.
Sharon or Susan? No?
So most of my questions, I think, are probably more appropriate for executive session for when we talk about the MOA. I mean, I guess just for here, I'll say I continue to be grateful for the efforts that staff has put into this. Like many of you, I've been somewhat flooded with messages over the last 2.5 hours, people experiencing, for better and worse, some whiplash and trying to, you know, just recognize that it's a fluid situation, and just still say again that, you know, this is the biggest crisis faced in public education in the history of this country. And I just think that, you know, understanding that the bottleneck will shift, just as Andy was saying, as we solve one problem, other problems will necessarily crop up, is just sort of how we need to be aware of going forward. I mean, just to pick up on my comments for last week, I think what's really important is that we have a process. And I know I said it last week, but I'll just say it again, that really speaks to the teaching and learning aspect of how this is going to roll out. So we need revised learning expectations by grade level and by subject. We need clear and shared expectations for parents and educators about what a child is supposed to know. Again, I want to push back a little bit on the idea that I've heard, which is that, oh, we have to wait until we know exactly how many hours are going to be in the building versus not in the building. I actually don't believe that's true, because as from the beginning, I think that we had to prepare for a seamless model back and forth. And so I think that having, you know, there are lots of questions out there about the actual pedagogy, about what capacity educators need, about how are we going to do science labs? How are we going to do, you know, document-based questions? How are we going to do 5-paragraph essays? Whatever it is, these things are not going to change. They haven't changed for the last 2 months. They're not going to change the next 2 months. And I think we still need to figure out how to do them. And I guess I just, again, would want to note that we don't want to be like a little kid soccer game where everybody just kind of like runs after the ball. We need some people in positions, and we really need folks focused on the educator capacity piece of this, because right now what I've seen or what I've heard from the last couple of public comments is a lot of teachers doing great work individually on their own this summer, but it's also true that we need probably about multiple orders of magnitude more kind of coordination and planning on the teaching and learning side. So I appreciate all of this, and I know these are not easy things. I'm continue to wonder how we can get a clear vision of what teaching and learning will look like for our students. Again, not how many hours are we in the building and that sort of thing, but like, what do they want to know? What are they going to know? And how are we going to deliver it in a remote way with fidelity? So I think that piece is still outstanding in my mind. I think the second piece that I would say is that I have a lot of concern, continue to have a lot of concern about our most vulnerable students. Typically, we don't get great survey responses from those parents, or we get pieces of survey responses that we have a wishful. We can overinterpret sometimes. Let me say it that way. And I think doing honest to goodness outreach to parents in our Steps to Success community with very clear questions that we're coming back with answers on. I don't mean the generic stuff. I mean, like, there are 6 to 8 or 10 things that we really need to figure out for our families in housing. What are those, and what is our plan to kind of divide and conquer and get information back in that doesn't rely on them responding to emails or coming to our website. Similarly with EL parents. And so I just think that there are going to be a particular set of groups. We hear loud and clear from the special ed parents as well. So I think my focus is very much on the pedagogical side, not because the physical side isn't important, but because I just feel like we have this magic month of time. And I hear people who said we should have been doing it from the beginning. It's been a busy summer. I just think we have a magical month right now to really kind of lean forward on this and put together something that can be exciting and innovative. And we're not going to know exactly what it is that, how it will play out, but we'll be pretty clear on what we're trying to achieve and what we're testing along the way, so that people understand that experimentation and revision and iteration is part of the process, and it's not going to be sort of a one and done sort of thing. So at any rate, I appreciate this. I know that our panels have been working pretty hard on all of these questions, on educator capacity, on student learning, on social emotional, on the health requirements to get back into the buildings, and all the things that we talked about Matt stepping up and doing. So I appreciate all that work as well. And it's going to become probably more important, not less, as we kind of give them sort of the outline of the structure and have them react to it. So at any rate, I'll save the rest of my questions, but thank you.
Yeah, Meg, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to, can I respond a little bit? Do we have time or no?
Sure.
I just wanted to say that in terms of our vulnerable population, Steps to Success and EL have done a magnificent job this summer of being in contact with students and families, delivering food, asking them what they need, making sure that kids are safe, making sure that kids who've graduated are still, in contact. They also have personally reached out when we sent out the PSB email to families, and advisors called families and supported them in filling out the survey. So I think, and same with MECO and same with EL. So I think that there's a real recognition on the part of our coordinators that kind of support is really necessary. So I want to say that that is definitely ongoing. And in terms of the teaching and learning piece, Michelle and I have our first meeting. We just were, as you know, kind of formally appointed as co-leading the department this year. We have our first meeting with coordinators K-12 tomorrow to introduce ourselves and to start laying out some of the questions we have and how we can support them. The coordinators have done an excellent job this summer of meeting with teachers. We've had almost 1,000 opportunities participated in terms of professional development, but we do need to get it codified. And I think that is absolutely critical, the learning expectations and all of that. And so I do think that is super important. And, it's definitely on the big list.
Sharon's next, David. Sharon, go ahead.
I find that I actually am looking at this proposal with just an enormous amount of grief. There's a big difference between not being ready and believing that you're not ready. And what I have seen happen over the course of the last 3 months is extraordinary efforts made by key stakeholders to do everything that they can to put the knowledge, information, and resources into place in order to enable children, especially our littlest children, to have access to an education. I believe that the model that's presented effectively deinstitutionalizes children ages K through 2. I don't think that children are going to be able, I don't think that the majority of children in Brookline in grades K through 2 are going to be able to access this model. I have a child in that range who has lost a quarter or a third of a year of education, who is pre-literate. And I do not see a scenario in which 100% remote learning is going to enable him to gain literacy. If we wanted to solve our enrollment crisis based on the text messages that are coming in, I think we've effectively done so. There are three key aspects of risk mitigation that go into having safe schools in the context of COVID. PPE, ventilation, and testing. Enormous work, enormous hours have gone into putting into place those pieces in order to ensure that Brookline is ahead of many of the school districts in the country in terms of readiness for taking on COVID in a hybrid model. Okay, I don't really know how much more strenuously I can say that. The fact that many of our key stakeholders do not have adequate information about the processes that have been put into place, the work that has been done, the resource mobilization that continues to be ongoing is not evidence the school district is not ready to create a safe environment, especially for children ages like in grades K through 2. It is, I believe, the consequence of a lack of information about the work that has been done and what a real environment of risk mitigation looks like. One of the things that I have been personally committed to from the beginning, from before the start of our school closures, was treating our educators like they were essential workers and putting them in a position in which they were being treated as essential workers. I understand that educators didn't sign up to be essential workers when they decided to become teachers. They are in many critical ways, but not in the context of an epidemic. But here we are, right? And just to be perfectly clear, I agree with many in the community who believe that this is where we're going to be for many, many years to come. You know, if it isn't this, there's going to be other zoonotically transmitted diseases. There's going to be other crises. We need to be a resilient school system, and this poses an opportunity for us to innovate and to build our capacity for communications, for responsiveness, for treating our teachers like we protect them, right? And then the last point that I'm going to make, and I have to say, I think that this is probably one of the biggest sources of grief that I've had, or that I've experienced over the course of this very difficult process. It has been posed to this school committee through, I think at this point, well over 500 emails, that there is a conflict at some sort of a rights-based level between life and education, and that somehow life trumps education and access to education. I would like to be clear that in my view, and in the view of like international human rights, a child's right to an education is as sacrosanct as a child's right to life. And that children in refugee camps in Afghanistan, even where there's COVID, are taking significant risks in order to have access to an education, because having an education is foundational to having a quality of life. And given the fact that we do not have an end time horizon on this COVID crisis, not November, not December, not 2021, not 2022, or any other crisis, it is essential that we enshrine both the right to life and health and the right to education for all children under our jurisdiction, you know, in our response. And right now, I do not believe that we do so for children ages 5 through 9. Over.
Okay, I am the last one up, and then we'll see what we want to do from there. Go back to Mariah's questions or whatever. Much of what I have been thinking has been said, but I do hope that as we come up with our benchmarks in terms of windows, ventilation, filters, that we can do what we said we would do, which is to kind of certify, in quotes, a classroom as meeting those benchmarks, and that we would do that starting with our BEEP classes first, because we want to enroll them right away, and then going to kindergarten and first. And so that those classrooms would be student and staff ready as soon as possible. Could be 2 weeks, could be 3 weeks, I don't know, but that we have some kind of a timeline that we are looking to get our students and our staff into these safe classrooms and then safe areas of buildings. So I think that's really critical. And I hope we phase it in by grades, that we don't wait until the entire building is okay, but that particular can actually, and Charlie can actually attend to the needs of a classroom to make it ready, student and staff ready. So that's one thought. I just want to say to the public that we do have a lot of school committee members who are have involvement in special needs students. And so just, I'm not going to call people out, but we have a lot of us who have children with IEPs, or we do work around advocacy for children. There's a couple of us that do work for advocacy around children with special needs. So I just want the public to know that in fact, there is a lot of expertise on the school committee around special needs. Doesn't mean we don't have a lot of work to do. I just want to make sure that the public knows that we're well represented on the school committee. I like the idea kind of what Andy's thinking, how can we help our families? This notion of pods where families of means are creating their own safe spaces with a group of families. And, what can we do, especially for our children whose families cannot afford to have such efforts? Is there a way that we can kind of create pods or groups that would be helpful in some way, both for childcare and for learning? And perhaps some of the outdoor spaces could be used for that. Perhaps some work with our extended day programs can help with that. I don't know, but I think we should try and do something to help those children and those families. I think that that's really important. I think we need to, again, work with our teachers. They should be doing full planning around remote learning. We need to understand what kind of supplemental tools they may need. Do they have the right cameras? Do they have the right whiteboards that can be used on the computer? Do they have the tools that they need to make remote learning work? They know what those are, and we should be doing an inventory and getting that to them. I think a lot of work should be happening at the school level, that the schools should be looking at what they need for their populations and doing a lot of grade level work. I haven't heard much around project-based learning tonight. We've talked about it in the past, how critical that's going to be. Those schedules that the kindergarten, you were showing us, I think K to 5, but we know that kindergarten looks very different from 5th grade. And so I'm thinking those are more placeholders when we have those times and an hour to do this and an hour to do that. We know that doesn't work for 5-year-olds. And so I'm assuming that work still needs to be done. I would hope so. And then I would really like us to spend, not tonight, but I have a lot of questions around those highly vulnerable students, that 300 or so. I just don't know what that programming is looking. Are they coming during the school day? Is this after school time? Are they on Wednesdays when other people aren't doing? I mean, I just have a lot of questions about what that program looks like. I just don't know. And, we want to make it work for those children and give them great opportunities as well. So those are kind of my thoughts. Thank you for listening. And so let's see where we are. So now it's almost 7. At 7, we were going to go into executive session if we still think we need to. It sounds like we should at least go there, see what's on our minds. Susan had a lot of thoughts about that. Mariah, I don't know how many more questions you have. They take time.
They do. But from the public perspective, these are things that they don't necessarily get an answer to, right? And we got 500 emails, and some of this has been teased out. It might be helpful to have them, talked about. So can I bring up at least a couple more?
bring up a couple more, but let's watch our time.
Okay, so what is and you and David alluded this a little bit, but what has been considered for the extended day partnership to establish pods for working families?
I think that's a pin. I would guess that's pin, to pin that.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Let me see.
I mean, it's a good question. It's just
okay. So here's one that I actually have a commentary on too, which is a lot of what our kids have been going through is transition and trauma, and the idea that, for example, a kindergartner or any grade, a first grader, they spend 3 weeks in a classroom, and then if it's time for first grade to go hybrid or in person, and their family does not want them to be part of the in-person aspect, that they then need to join a new group in their remote learning academy, I find completely awful. So I guess I want to say that there has to be, when we talked about seamlessness and all of that idea that, and when we look at the poll that I put out on Facebook, it was about 60-40 for families who, at least in that context, where 60% wanted to be in person and 40% not. So the idea that 40% of our kids are going to have to join a whole new group at some point in the future and rebuild those relationships seems very disruptive to me. And that was a question from the public too. Then I have a couple more. Let me see. I'm just reading through them really quickly. Just give me 1 sec.
Okay. I mean, I will say that many writers sent us really good questions. I mean, there's hundreds of really good questions.
Yep, they are. But families want to know about switching between models and if they'll be able to switch between models if they themselves feel like their situation does not suit the model they chose anymore, will they be able to switch after the stop sign in that chart?
I think that's something we still, go ahead, Jim.
I thought we had already addressed that and said that, you can't go back and forth from day to day because that's unsustainable. But of course, you'd have to build in time for people to decide at a certain place that they feel more comfortable going in or they want to go back out. So flexibility is the name of the game. It has to be in a way that's manageable. That's all. That'll probably be individual decisions as we go, but no one's locked out.
Okay, I guess I'll put a pin in the rest of the questions. The only thing I wanted to mention just in closing was that Jennifer mentioned that DESE has high standards for what closes a classroom, but DESE also has very low standards, and maybe the public doesn't know for what constitutes a child having to isolate. And so that's another thing that people need to understand. If a kid has any sort of a COVID symptom, they need to isolate until they test positive or quarantine for 14 days. And so that's just something for families to understand that makes all of this complex and sort of backs up a lot of what the staff work has been around trying to find a model that will allow students to again, have a consistent community during all of that. I'll leave the rest of the questions for email.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So, I do want to say that, we are scheduled to take a vote on Wednesday, and I know that not all our questions are going to be answered, that there are so many details that many teams are working on, don't have answers to everything. And so I guess we need to kind of think about what questions need to be answered in order for us as individuals to make a vote. If there's something holding you up for making a vote or for voting, then that should be what comes forward first. We will not have all the details because they will be evolving, and we're always going to be working on those. Mariah?
I just wanted to mention that this goes to the point of decision making. I wanted to confirm, because this is my understanding, that last week we had talked about parents needing to make a choice in the very near term, And now parents don't have a decision. The school committee needs to make a decision, but parents themselves likely don't need to make a decision right away if the school committee votes to approve this, right? Because then in the future, people would be approached on a grade by grade basis. Is that, or whatever the decision making basis is about when they're ready? Is that correct? That parents won't need to make a decision in the next week or two?
Right. So in the new plan that we presented tonight, you see that everybody except for BEEP and our most vulnerable starts remotely until you get to that stop point where the choice has to be made between the remote learning academy and the hybrid version of your grade level.
Okay, David, and then Helen.
In the spirit of your most recent question, Suzanne, about what information would we need to be comfortable making a vote on Wednesday, I'll again reference the outdoor in-person learning component and also back what Helen said earlier, that we really should not waste this opportunity of good weather that we have to allow students to get to know their peers and their new educator. And I would like to see something really spelled out in tangible form with scheduling for outdoor learning for this time period, fully understanding that as the year goes on and as weather changes, that there will need to be deviations. But that's going to be true this year, no matter what we do. So that shouldn't be used as a reason to not delve into this until a month down the line. I mentioned at the previous meeting that one possible way could be kindergarten and first grade on Monday and second grade and third grade on Tuesday, et cetera. But I think there is a way to make this work so that children, regardless of vulnerability, all children have an opportunity in our district to get together and have that social emotional wellness piece in addition to the academic component. I don't want to see that missing from the plan that we end up voting on. I feel it really needs to be fleshed out a lot further. Then a question that I have for Casey would be, how far along are we in the assessment of needs for our special education students based upon the time that was missed in person last year since the suspension of schools in March? Because if we are getting this estimate of 300 from different program leaders, I'm just wondering what they are basing those estimates on. I appreciate that Ms. Mancini mentioned that Steps for Success and some of our other partner organizations have been very active in trying to call that information, but those are just a couple of groups, and there are a lot of constituencies that fall under this umbrella of most vulnerable students. So I want to make sure that the needs of anyone who's in those categories are being met and have been updated. I understand that's a Herculean task. Takes a lot of time. I'm sure that we're already doing it to some extent, but I think that it would be helpful if the community got a more direct sense of where we are in that process and that we are soliciting that feedback actively, not just in terms of surveys or passively through what different group leaders and administrators are basing off of what might very likely be obsolete information. And then also I'd like to try to know what our definition is going to be for economically disadvantaged. Is that household income? Is it a federal benchmark, a state benchmark? Is it some number that we're going to come up with?
Jim, you're on mute.
I was starting to answer and said I probably should hold. I was going to say it's probably going to be the free and reduced benchmark, but rather than my just saying that, I think you're right. We'll ask Casey to actually view that and see what the standard is that we're going by.
Helen, did you have something?
One thing I think that when Mariah talked about, what the deadline for remote versus in person, and I think there are people who have decided, both teachers and parents, that no matter what, they're not sending their kids back to school. We heard that in the questionnaire that we sent out. And we've heard it also from many, of the emails, et cetera. it seems to me that we should start that remote group from the beginning. Those people who want to be in remote know they want, rather than having the transition from, you know, being in one class and then going to another class and trying to adapt to another teacher. I'm not sure it makes sense. So I would like us to consider that as a way to start off and know that those children and those teachers definitely want to do remote, and we will do that. You know, we will be able to provide that.
I think that makes sense for more implications than we're actually talking about here. And because it has implications for returning students as well. But, you know, we can't go too far down that road till we actually know the numbers. But that, your point is well taken.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim, you want a last word or no before we vote to go into executive session?
Well, I don't think I need a last word, except I'm going to take one anyway. So, except to say that the questions are good. Some of them cannot be answered, obviously, but the most important ones we should get you those answers to. But it's going to be important that we're at a place where you can actually vote, because we have to open school, and we have to do the planning for opening school. So I just want to push to say, as much as these answers, and we'll work like crazy over the next 2 days to get these answers, but then hopefully we're going to be in a place to vote. So yeah, now I'm done. If you want to go in exec session, let's see what people say.
Okay, so I move to meet in executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, for the following purposes. Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, BEU, Unit A, Unit B, and paraprofessionals, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and I so declare. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, we've got a bunch. I have to roll call on this. Barbara? Oh, do we lose Barbara?
I think she accidentally, she was going to try to get back in as an attendee.
Okay, Helen?
Yes, Barbara accidentally.
Yeah, hope she'll meet us on the other side.
She is. She will. I'm going to let her know now.
David?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Sharon?
I'm sorry, I had to step away. What are we voting on?
I'm going into executive session.
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
And I say yes. I do want to thank everybody for tonight's presentation. There was so much work involved. I really do appreciate that. And there's more work to be done. So we will try to be supportive and do it together. We will not be coming back to open session after our executive session. Robin, do we need to leave and go back in?
Yes, I'll end this meeting and then you have another link.
And we have